During recess at school, the boy discussed the popular game Dark Spirit with his friend Ji-ho. Ji-ho thought it would be cool to make their own game because, according to his classmate, there wasn't a game like that with challenging levels in their country yet. He said that they could come up with a plan and concept for the game and not worry about the final result for now. He imagined a landscape with monsters and various traps in the future game. His classmate did not want to agree to Ji-ho's proposal and thought it was a silly idea, but Ji-ho was still able to convince him. The guys started thinking about the name, deciding that it would sound cooler in English. When Ji-ho named the game Shadow of Dungeon, he couldn't have imagined that this game, created for fun, would turn into a terrifying monster that would destroy the whole world in the future. Years later, Tae-jun got a job at a construction site, and while digging the ground, thought about how he was even worse off than an ant without money. Tae-jun had to work very hard and rest very little because all he had was his body, and he needed to survive and develop somehow. In order to take a break, the exhausted and tired Tae-jun sat down with the other workers to talk and take a few sips of water. One man asked if Tae-jun had really rented an apartment and when he would be moving. A smile lit up his face and he confirmed the rumor. To save up for a year's rent, Tae-jun had worked hard for 5 years and 4 months. Despite the admiration and praise of his colleagues, the modest Tae-jun objected, saying that he had only rented a small 2-room apartment. The conversation and reflections on the harsh reality were interrupted by a colleague who said it was time to get back to work and stop chatting. Until then, Tae-jun had been living in a small room in a rooftop extension with a wonderful view of Namsan Mountain. He lived there with his sister, who happily greeted him when he came home tired after work. Tae-jun could barely stand on his feet and was slightly aggressive that evening, accusing his sister of skipping school, even though it wasn't true. His sister also expressed her dissatisfaction when she saw the bag of rolls in Tae-jun's hands. She forced him to eat a normal meal. But unfortunately, according to her brother, she could only cook something resembling dog food. She was very upset by these words. Despite their conflicts, life wasn't so bad, but Tae-jun didn't give himself a break even at night. So he also worked at a karaoke cafe. There, he had to go hungry because he didn't have enough money for a proper meal, and dinner rolls didn't fill him up for long. During one of Tae-jun's shifts, 2 men visited the cafe with the intention of having a good time. They immediately announced that they wanted to order the largest karaoke room, as well as a bottle of whiskey, fruit, and 2 girls. Although this job did not require physical effort, such customers drained Tae-jun emotionally. He replied that the cafe did not provide girls for visitors. The men were drunk, and one of them got so angry at Tae-jun's refusal that he threw a stack of papers right in his face. Tae-jun was desperate. He couldn't do anything because he didn't want to cause trouble, or worse, lose his job. The insolent man shouted angrily and threatened him in every way possible. The second man, who was still more or less sane, apologized to Tae-jun and with difficulty dragged his drunk companion out of the cafe. Desperate, Tae-jun began to gather up the scattered business cards and nervously crumpled them up. He almost cried. Such incidents exhausted him greatly and left him with almost no strength to keep trying. On his way home at night, Tae-jun would linger to enjoy the night view of Namsan Mountain. Only beautiful landscapes could cheer him up after a difficult and long day at work. It was a pity that he would soon be moving and would no longer be able to admire them. At home, Tae-jun, already prepared for bed, noticed a flash drive and remembered that Ji-ho had asked him to test a game developed at his company. The next day, he met Ji-ho at a cafe to discuss it. Tae-jun had to try playing the game and understand why he, and not a company employee, had been chosen for beta testing. He agreed and decided to set aside one evening to help his old friend, Ji-ho. Tae-jun launched the game and saw the title Shadow of the Dungeon on the screen. Suddenly, memories came flooding back. It turned out to be the very game that he and Ji-ho had invented for fun back in their school days. Tae-jun was pleasantly surprised that Ji-ho had decided to bring their idea to life, even after so many years. Before he even had a chance to start playing, Tae-jun instantly lost. He remembered that he himself wanted a game with difficult levels, and he liked it. Tae-jun hadn't played computer games in so long because of work that he set himself the goal of defeating at least one boss that night. Otherwise, he wouldn't go to sleep. Another workday began for Tae-jun. Suddenly, a phone call came in from an unknown number. It was the police informing him of something Tae-jun could never have imagined. He had been scammed out of all the money he had saved over 5 years. The police officer tried to explain and calm Tae-jun down, but he couldn't hear anything anymore. He was completely devastated and didn't know how he would go on living. His colleagues shouted something after Tae-jun, but he just ran away. What had happened was the last straw, and he cursed absolutely everything. Tae-jun ran as fast as he could, cursing everything he had, even though he had practically nothing left. His head was completely empty of thoughts. He didn't even see where he was running, he just ran without knowing where to escape from his grief. After crashing into a pole, he came to his senses a little. Late at night, Tae-jun looked at the night view of Namsan once again, and for the first time it seemed disgusting to him. Tae-jun even thought about death. The next morning, Tae-jun's curse came true and something happened that no one ever expected. Residents were informed that Namsan had simply disappeared overnight. Tae-jun remembered that in the game, unknown monsters once appeared in the gnome's mine. The terrible creatures took over the underground mines and, once they got outside, began to threaten everyone on Earth. These monsters were called golems. Their bodies were so hard that they were weapons in themselves. A reporter at the scene reported on the news that no one knew what had caused this disaster. The government began to prepare for a second wave of disasters, as it was unknown what other tragedies might occur. The reporter's speech was interrupted by a huge, terrifying golem that appeared behind him out of nowhere. The correspondent slowly turned around, not understanding what was happening, and not realizing that in a few seconds he would be sent to the other world. Taejun saw only huge golems on his phone screen. The entire internet was buzzing about what had happened, and tanks arrived at the scene to resolve the situation. Despite what was happening in the news about the golems, people's lives and work continued as usual, and Taejun had to work as before. But he didn't even talk to his colleagues. He just wondered who these monsters really were and why they were so similar to the ones he had once invented for a game. His colleagues began to notice that Taejun was acting strangely and didn't even communicate, as if he were lost in thought. One colleague said that according to rumors, there was a golden golem. Their bodies were made of ore, but one of them could be made of gold or diamonds. The colleague said that people had even started to band together to catch the golden golem. For example, crane operator Mr. Lee had already earned a decent amount of money from this. They thought about quitting their jobs and getting involved in this business too, but they quickly realized that it was a stupid idea. On his way home, Taejun recalled the words of the police officer who gave no guarantee of compensation to people who had been victims of real estate fraud, and then he thought about his colleague's words. Maybe if Taejun caught the golden golem himself, he could get tens of millions of won, or even more. At home, Taejun was greeted again by his sister, who bombarded him with questions out of concern. She was outraged that her brother had to go to work at the construction site, even in such unstable and dangerous times. But Taejun was happy about this because the karaoke bar was temporarily closed, and construction was his only source of income. Taejun and his sister were surprised when someone suddenly dropped in. It was the landlady who had come to inform them that they had not paid rent for 2 months. Although she understood the situation, she also needed to make a living. Desperate, Taejun realized that the real and most terrifying monster was actually poverty. He couldn't sleep that night. Every second, he was tormented by thoughts of the golden golem. He knew that there was a monster like that in the game too. And then Taejun realized that if all the events were identical to those in the game, then he had to defend himself as he would in the game. In the middle of the night, Taejun set off on a search, taking a hammer and a pickaxe with him. He reached the dangerous zone, which was practically unguarded even during the day. Now Taejun had no doubts. He knew he was doing the right thing because he needed the money more than anyone else. He heard terrifying sounds and mentally prepared himself for battle with the golem. The huge golem was getting closer and closer, but Taejun was even glad about it. Standing behind a stone wall a few meters away from the golem, Taejun tried to calm himself down so that he could confidently destroy the terrible monster. He knew how golems behaved in the game. Most likely the same thing happens in real life, which means that the golem will not be able to harm him. The golem suddenly approached and almost crushed Taejun with its huge paw. Taejun thought about it and realized that there was no way out. If he ran away now, he might never get another chance, and that motivated him. He already swung his hammer, but then he suddenly thought of his sister, who was terrified of losing Taejun. He lowered the hammer and muttered to himself that he could earn the money back safely, no matter how many years it took. But alas, it was too late to retreat and run away. The golem appeared right in front of Taejun, and it wasn't alone. More golems began to appear one after another, and Taejun froze in place, shocked and terrified. He didn't run, didn't fight back, and didn't even scream when the golem almost grabbed him with its huge paw. The golem did not spare Taejun and destroyed him with one blow. And then, at the most terrifying moment, Taejun woke up. It turned out that he had fallen asleep while playing the game and had simply dreamed everything that had happened. He screamed in anger so loudly that he even woke up his sister sleeping in the next room. Taejun thought it was better this way than if it had all been real. He tried to calm down and wondered why he had made these monsters so ruthless for the game. After losing several times, he understood their behavior pattern. Taejun reasoned that the probability of a golem attacking on first encounter was very high, but it could slow down for a split second and then strike sharply if the player dodged with their arm raised. This meant that to dodge the attack, he had to act not immediately after raising his arm. He had to catch his breath, get ready, and wait for the golem's movement to slow down. And now it was possible to calmly and confidently deliver the decisive blow. Taejun continued to play. After attacking the golem, he fell down exhausted, but he was even happy because now he seemed to be slowly understanding the whole strategy of the game. And then suddenly the golem began to rise. Taejun was shocked by what was happening. He had literally neutralized this monster just a minute ago. Taejun felt a strange pain and looked down to see a wound on his ribs. He didn't understand how this had happened because he was so confident in his tactics. He thought that there could be no unbeatable moment in the game, but it was strange why he couldn't win. The huge golem approached again to brutally attack Taejun. He delivered a powerful triple blow with his right hand. Taejun fell from a great height, landing on his back on the uneven concrete surface. The golem had no intention of backing down until he destroyed him. He was about to deliver another triple blow, but this time with his left hand. The wounded Taejun managed to get up for a second and try to do something, but his actions were in vain. Taejun went further and further. He was very interested in testing the game, even though it was quite scary. He understood his guesses and omissions. The golem effortlessly delivered the planned blow to Taejun's back. Never in his life had Taejun screamed so loudly, and he had never experienced such pain. He couldn't feel his spine and was completely unable to move. It was as if the golem had severed the entire vital part of his body. The golem stood behind Taejun and intended to finish him off. Taejun's backpack tore open, and a heavy double plate fell out. He tried to dodge even though it wasn't the best idea. For now, the golem stepped back and did not attack Taejun, but he did not know how to defend himself. Taejun's back hurt as if it had been broken into pieces, but he found the strength to stand up. He survived thanks to the plate that had fallen out of his backpack. Taejun realized that he now had no means of defense and was powerless. It was time to leave. He noticed a fancy poster with the Namsan Mountains and wondered if his actions were worth anything at all. Maybe there was no point in going back after all. He didn't want to continue living this kind of life. Working without prospects for years, putting up with terrible customers and poverty every day, was the worst possible outcome. Taejun shouted that he was fed up with it all, caught up with the golem, and hit him in the leg with a hammer. Surprisingly, even the hammer bent against the golem's hard body. But it was too late for Taejun to back down. He had to keep fighting. Taejun set his sights on attacking the left side of the golem's body, and he succeeded. He knew what to do next, but before he could even blink, the golem grabbed his head and threw Taejun onto a pile of concrete bricks. After such a fall, Taejun's back was torn and hurt many times more. Also, the pickaxe fell out of his backpack, and he was left with no means of defense. But now he had what he wanted. In his hand was a small stone. The player Taejun didn't understand what kind of item his character had obtained, but it was labeled as a fragment with negative flesh. He wanted to find out where this item came from and what it was for. But suddenly a cutscene began in the game. This scene showed a powerful knight holding this very fragment of negative flesh in his hand. He was barely standing and had apparently lost his power for some reason. Now Taejun noticed that the knight's side had split open in the game, and a particle had fallen out of it. This was exactly what his character was supposed to get. Once again, the golem appeared before Taejun, who decided to continue risking his life for victory and for himself. Taejun ran the fragment with negative flesh across his arm and experienced excruciating pain. His arm began to transform into a strong, stone-like, and enormous arm like that of a real golem. With his powerful hand, he smashed the golem's head and inflicted significant damage on it. This battle was destined to become legendary. There was nowhere left for either of them to retreat, and only one of them could win. The adrenaline rush made Taejun's eyes burn brightly. He had almost no sense of fear left, only a wild desire to fight for his life. The battle continued, and Taejun's arm grew stronger with every passing second. With a confident blow, Taejun defeated the golem and deftly knocked him to the ground. Taejun was simply doing his best, but now he realized that his tactics were actually working. He was a little scared by the sight of his hand, but Taejun was happy that he had become hundreds of times stronger than he had been before. A doubt flashed through Taejun's mind as to whether he had really defeated the golem, as well as a desire to remain alone in this world. Suddenly, Taejun woke up again from shouting loudly, and his surprised sister burst into the room. He had fallen asleep again while playing and thought that all this was really happening. There was a bandage on his face that hadn't been there before. His sister was shocked and concerned about Taejun's condition, but he tried not to show it and claimed that he was just having nightmares. But in addition to the bandage on his cheek, his sister also noticed Taejun's bandaged arm. This frightened not only his sister, but Taejun himself. He decided to lie and say that he had simply injured himself at work, even though he himself did not understand what had happened to him. Taejun asked his worried sister not to worry about it and just go back to sleep. When his sister left, he began to slowly unwrap his arm and saw no changes yet. Suddenly, Taejun's expression changed and his eyes nearly popped out of his head. His arm had suddenly turned into a golem's arm, just like in the game. Taejun realized that the rules of the game also worked in real life. He wanted to discuss this with Jiho urgently, but he couldn't get through to him. Communication had deteriorated after the monsters appeared in the city. Taejun had no idea that Jiho's phone could have been destroyed by monsters, just like Jiho himself. He decided to go to an abandoned area at a time when no one else was around. He wanted to understand what was different from the game events and what was similar. Taejun's body was overflowing with energy, and he tried to see if he could do something supernatural with the strength of a monster. He hit a pole with his hand and only hurt himself, while the pole remained intact and unharmed. Taejun assumed that the energy might not have gone into physical strength. He couldn't jump high either. He misjudged his strength again and simply fell. Taejun tested his speed, endurance, and control skills, but none of them had improved at all. He was very disappointed. When Taejun arrived at the construction site in the morning, he looked extremely strange, and his colleagues were frightened by his behavior and appearance. He again asked them not to pay attention to it and hid everything that was happening from his colleagues. Deep down, he was disappointed that he had not gained superpowers. Taejun thought that everything was much simpler and more logical in the game. If you acquired the power of the golem, your strength would improve as you leveled up. Taejun's only weapon at the moment was his left hand. He decided to see if it was possible to fight the monster with his right hand. Late at night, he returned to the same place to see the golem. Taejun touched the golem's leg with his right hand, and surprisingly, nothing happened. All this time, he thought he would die. Hunting golems was too difficult. He already understood the monster's behavior, but he was afraid that if he did what he wanted to do, everyone would turn away from him, and he would lose his job. From that moment on, Taijun devoted all his free time outside of work, sleep, and meals to analyzing the game. He also trained to strengthen his body. At night, he would go out to test and practice the various techniques he had learned. With each passing day, Taejun's mind and body gained more experience, and after a month, he was unrecognizable. He had bulked up and become incredibly strong. Taejun considered starting to train in group fights, as single fights were no longer enough. Everything happened exactly as he wanted. Another golem jumped out from around the corner, but this one was significantly different from the others. Even though Taejun's strength was running out, he had to keep fighting. He noticed that this golem was not like the others, and then a terrifying realization dawned on Taejun. This was the very same golden golem that Taejun's colleague had once told him about. Taejun remembered recently watching the news. They reported that more and more miners were appearing every day. They also mentioned the golden golems, although this was nothing new to Taejun. The miners were communities of people who deliberately entered dangerous areas to hunt golems. Taejun's sister overheard the news and became indignant, condemning people who risked their lives just for money. She warned Taejun not to even think about doing such a thing, but it was too late. He got caught up in the excitement but continued to hide it from his sister. He took a firm stance that these risks were worth the huge sums of money. In reality, the golden golem looked a little different than in the game. Taejun didn't have much strength left, but he believed in himself and thought he could defeat one more monster. Gathering his strength and preparing his golem-like fist, Taejun lunged at the golden golem. At first, the golem tried to damage Taejun, but he skillfully dodged, and the precious golem could only break the concrete ground. Taejun cleverly outmaneuvered the golden golem and delivered a powerful blow. He noticed that the golden golem's movements were no different from those of ordinary golems, which meant he could defeat it just like the others. All he had to do was concentrate. Taejun himself almost turned into a monster. He looked terrifying, like a beast, and pounced on the golem as it jumped out of the way to avoid the blow. The golden golem hit the stone ground so hard that Taejun flew high into the air. But Taejun did not think about giving up for a second. Now he craved a battle that would surely bring victory. He continued to confidently fight off the powerful golden golem despite his lack of strength. Taejun stood directly behind the confused golem and was about to deliver the final decisive blow. Taejun's plans were ruined by another golem that appeared out of nowhere, pushing him to the ground to mislead his opponent. When he came to a few seconds later, Taejun remembered that he was in a dangerous area, and that he needed to focus not only on the golden golem, but also on the others. Taejun had never fought two golems at once before, so he thought his chances of winning were zero. He was tormented by doubts again, but he had come a long way and encountered the golden golem for the first time. There might not be another opportunity like this. He remembered his own words that several tens of millions for a monster were worth risking his life. There were few golden golems, so he couldn't miss this chance. But Taejun was overcome with fear because he was small and alone, and there were two of them. Taejun tried to calm down in a matter of seconds, and remembered that he had already fought two golems in the game. He began to quickly devise a tactic. He needed to keep his distance from the golems, anticipate their behavior, and determine the moment of attack, spending as little time as possible on respite. He understood that he had every chance of defeating both golems with a single blow. When the golems stood apart, Taejun immediately put his plan into action. He simultaneously dodged and attacked them with his powerful left arm, inflicting heavy damage on both. Everything was going according to plan until Taejun felt a sharp pain in his side. Even worse, the two golems delivered a very powerful blow to Taejun's head. He fell, bleeding profusely, and lay almost unconscious. He thought that he couldn't allow himself to die so stupidly and easily. He needed to get out of there, but he no longer had the physical ability to do so. Suddenly, a guy jumped out from somewhere and attacked the golems who were about to finish off Taejun with tremendous speed and force. For a split second, he managed to neutralize one golem. It was a muscular blonde guy with a bandaged golem-like arm. Without hesitation, the guy confidently lunged at the golden golem, who was already swinging at him. You could see in his eyes that he craved victory even more than Taejun did during his battles. Fragments of gold flew off the golden golem from his blows. The blonde guy managed to defeat both golems. Taejun could barely see it through his clouded consciousness and couldn't even believe what was happening. The guy was glad that this time he had managed to save at least someone from the golems. He tried to calm Taejun down and sent him to the hospital. The next day, Taejun woke up in the hospital and the first thing he saw was his worried and angry sister. She was upset and reproached Taejun for not listening to her and going to look for the golems anyway, risking his life. Taejun's rescuer left a backpack with gold, which was part of the golden golem, and a note. Taejun and his sister were stunned by the stranger's actions. Meanwhile, lab assistant Shin A-Rim was playing computer games in her office, surrounded by various jars and folders with documents. Suddenly, military officer Shin Yun-ha burst into the office. She was outraged and began to scold Shin A-Rim for her idleness at work. Shin Yun-ha was quite angry and was ready to do anything to Shin A-Rim to correct her behavior. She squeezed Shin A-Rim's head, trying to vent her anger in this way. Shin A-Rim tried to distract her and reproached her for not fulfilling her duties. She told her about the insolent men who persuaded the military to enter the institution's territory, claiming that they were even better than the military and good at catching monsters. One of the men even insulted Shin Yunha, saying that she was unattractive and had a bad personality. He himself was not attractive at all, but entry to the premises was prohibited to everyone except the military. The fools did not understand and did not want to listen, which is why Shin Yunha was in a bad mood that day. Out of anger, she squeezed Shinarim's head even harder. She screamed in pain, but at the same time comforted Shin Yunho, explaining that people were behaving this way because of the current situation. She calmed down and asked Shin Yunha to just keep working and ignore the shameless, rude people because there was nothing she could do about it. Shin Yunha showed no mercy and refused to listen to Shin A-rim. She continued to mock her. She reproached her again for playing games. Both of them worked on the disaster response committee, but Shin A-rim allowed herself to slack off at work. Shin Yunha asked her to present the results of her research on monsters. Shin A-rim thought for a second that people like her were the real monsters, but she kindly agreed to show everything anyway. There were 2 pieces of golem flesh on the table. Shin A-rim explained that one piece was normal, but the other also had bits of golem skin on it. She suggested that Shin Yunha conduct a small experiment and hit the fragments with a hammer. First, she hit the normal fragment with all her might, and it instantly shattered into dozens of different pieces. Shin A-rim was surprised at how Shin Yunhei managed to do that. She was stunned by her strength and anger. She explained that these fragments looked very similar to ordinary stones, and their composition and strength were the same as stones. Now Shin Yunha began to test the strength of the second fragment of flesh with skin. Such experiments were an excellent opportunity for her to get even and vent all her anger. Shin Yunha thought that she should have hit it with a lighter hammer, because now her arm was sore and her head was spinning. This fragment remained intact and only cracked slightly. She did not understand why this was happening. Shin A-rim continued to explain that both fragments were visually identical, but one of them was many times harder and resistant to attempts to damage it. She assumed that this was due to the pieces of golem skin on the fragment, but it was too early to draw any definite conclusions. But as it turned out, it wasn't even skin, but some strange substance. When the fragment was broken into pieces, the pieces simply began to dissolve in the atmosphere. Shin A-rim said that she had already conducted experiments. For example, she placed a piece of skin on a regular stone, and it instantly evaporated. From this, she concluded that it was all about the golem's skin. She noticed that the ordinary stone instantly took on the same strength as the fragment, before all the skin tissue evaporated. Shin Yunha did not understand how to respond to Shin A-rim's explanations. To her, it all looked and sounded like science fiction. She asked what this could mean and if there were any theories. But Shin A-rim didn't know and just shrugged her shoulders because she was facing this for the first time herself. Shin A-rim said that she had conducted a biological experiment on 74 rats, changing the dosage and method of skin absorption. None of the rats survived. Shin Yunha gasped at the number she heard. Together, they concluded that for now the golem's skin could be considered poisonous to any living creature, but more research needed to be done. Shin A-rim jokingly suggested that Shin Yunha try touching a piece of golem skin, which made her angry again. But they understood that there was probably already a fool who had done something like that. After his treatment and release from the hospital, Taijun did not stop hunting golems. Since that day, he has successfully defeated 4 more golden golems. Now, unlike the first time, he acted as cautiously and deliberately as possible, although not as professionally as that stranger. But Taejun was still tormented by thoughts about this stranger, how he had obtained the golem's hand, and whether he was even acquainted with Jiho, or maybe there were other people with such power. Once again, Shin A-rim spent the night in the lab researching fragments and conducting various experiments. She disturbed Shin Yoon-hee with a phone call in the middle of the night and summoned her urgently to the laboratory. When Shin Yoon-hee arrived, she immediately showed her a rat whose body had grown stones after being injected with fragments of the golem's skin. So it worked on humans too. One day, an agitated grandmother entered the restricted area looking for her missing son. Like most of the people who came, she stood her ground, but the military had no right to let people into the area. The soldier expressed his sympathy to Shin Yoon-hee after the grandmother left. He wanted to help all the victims as soon as possible, but he felt like nothing was changing. He reasoned that the authorities were practically turning a blind eye to what was happening. There was not enough manpower and resources to fight the golems. Shin Yoon-ha tapped her colleague on the head and asked him not to cry, but to work harder so that there would be no time for regrets. The soldier noted that since there were monstrous golems, there might also be superheroes with special powers. He said that if there was an acceptable way and a chance to get superpowers, he would take advantage of it. And then Shin Yoon-ha remembered the experiment with the rat. For this experiment, Shin A-rim transplanted a piece of the fragment into a rat, which then broke through glass with its body. Its physical abilities improved dramatically. The military was called to a new scene. Every day someone was killing one golem. Someone was killing the golems, for which they were not paid, as if on schedule. Although no one suspected it, this unknown person was Taejun. Taejun became noticeably more handsome and happier. He had been hunting golems for 2 months, and during that time had compensated for the amount lost due to the scammer. He realized that in those 2 months, he had earned the same amount he had earned in the previous 5 years. Unfortunately, he had wasted all those years, but now he had found happiness. Shin Yoon-ha asked Shin A-rim not to tell anyone about the research, so that she could work on it further and not cause a stir in society. In response, Shinrim suggested that it might already be known among a small circle of people, and that the Golem Hunter might possess such power. Late in the evening, Shin Yunha decided to visit the restricted area and look around in the hope of encountering a hunter or intruder. At that moment, Taejun, who went hunting every night, appeared in the area. The increased security made him wary. Shin Yunha noticed the suspicious Taejun, crept up behind him, and threatened to shoot. She figured he wasn't a miner because he came without a team, which meant he just wanted to steal something. At first, Taejun raised his hands and simply listened to her, but then he thought that following her orders would cause him problems and abruptly ran around the corner of the building. This was a mistake because he ended up on a cliff at a complete dead end and trapped himself. Shin Yunha ordered him to raise his hands and come to her, but he was only thinking about how to get out of there. Taejun turned around and suddenly froze, fear flooding his eyes. He asked Shin Yunha to step aside immediately. Behind her stood the golem, already preparing to strike. It happened at the most inopportune moment. The golem struck and only slightly grazed Shin Yunho's back. She managed to jump closer to Taejun just in time. They were both frightened and couldn't understand why the golem had appeared here at this moment, but now they were both stuck in a dead end. The golem was blocking the exit and Taejun couldn't start fighting. It was too dangerous to reveal his abilities in front of Shin Yunhee. The golem began to attack and lunge at them. Shin Yunha shot at it with her pistol, but the golem didn't even react. Taejun decided to take matters into his own hands. He grabbed Shin Yunha and jumped off the cliff with her. For the first time in her life, she was so scared and shocked. She yelled at Taejun that he was crazy, and her heart almost jumped out of her chest. While in mid-air, Taejun struck with tremendous force and managed to neutralize the golem that had jumped off the cliff after them. Shin Yunha witnessed the entire scene. When they landed, Taejun covered Shin Yunha's face with his hand and asked her to leave immediately and forget everything she had seen. After all, he had saved her life. So that Shin Yunha would not see Taejun's face in a calm environment, he let her go and instantly ran away, hoping never to meet her again. For another 10 minutes, Shin Yunha stood stunned, frozen in shock from what had happened. She herself did not understand what she had seen. Returning to work, Shin Yunha asked Shin Arim to help treat the wound on her back. She was surprised that Shin Yunha had dared to go to a dangerous place without any equipment. Shin Yunha had no idea how to answer questions about how she managed to escape from the golem, because Taejun begged her to forget what she had seen. So she decided to simply change the subject and got angry at Shin Arim's questions. Every evening, when Taejun came home, the first thing he did was sit down to continue studying the game, because security in dangerous areas had been tightened, and that was bad for him. He had long since grown tired of playing the same rounds in the game for hours on end. Only Jiho could bring everything to completion by adding other types of monsters and cards to the game. As soon as Taejun thought about it, a sign with information about the update suddenly appeared on the screen. It was strange because it was only a beta version of the game. Taejun hurriedly clicked the confirmation button without thinking about the consequences of his actions. He began to look around the updated game and immediately noticed a group of miners discussing their earnings from battles with golems, including his own pumped-up self. Suddenly, they turned around and noticed a monster they called the Golden Golem. Taejun was surprised by the character's words because in real life, the Golden Golem looked different, but in the game it was ordinary except for a suspicious blue horn on its back. Its horn resembled a crystal. Taejun decided to try to catch this golem in the game. To the golem's surprise, he was able to defeat it without much effort. Its abilities were no different from those of ordinary golems. The game suggested that Taejun pull the blue horn out of the golem's lifeless body. Pulling it out was not as easy as it seemed, but since Taejun already possessed powerful strength, he succeeded. The characters in the game were approached by soldiers who had noticed everything that was happening, but at that moment, something terrible began to happen. Out of nowhere, hundreds of thick black threads began to spread, enveloping the crystal and pulling it out of Taejun's hands. All the characters were stunned and ran away in different directions out of fear. Taejun played and couldn't believe his eyes. A huge creature emerged from the threads in front of Taejun's character. It was a red golem hundreds of times larger than a normal golem, but it also had a horn on its head. With its huge paws, it destroyed buildings and punched holes in the asphalt. It was the most terrifying event in the entire game. One of the miners snatched a rifle from the soldiers' hands as they stood silently and did not intend to shoot at the golem. There was no other choice. Dozens of shots were fired at the golem's body and face, but it was invulnerable, and this only enraged it even more. The golem suddenly grabbed one of the soldiers with its huge paw and slowly brought him to its mouth. All the witnesses just stood there, stunned, screaming, and no longer trying to do anything. It would have been futile, and it would have been impossible to save the soldier. Taejun finished playing and watched the news. It turned out that everything from the game update had also come true in reality. A giant golem attacked the city. It was reported that the government was monitoring the monster and would soon evacuate residents from dangerous areas. Taejun couldn't believe what was happening and realized that thousands of innocent people had suffered because of his rash decision to update the game. He was tormented by guilt over what he had done, but there was no point in dwelling on it. He had to prepare for the evacuation. Most of all, Taejun was worried about what might happen to his sister. This became an incentive to take responsibility and destroy the golem. The government blamed Shin Yunho for allowing such a situation to occur in the city as the commander of the military unit. This happened because the miners provoked the golem with gunfire, and in such a situation, it was simply impossible to do anything. Shin Yunho was dismissed and had to be punished for what had happened. She accepted all the blame and promised to take responsibility for what happened because of the disaster. The authorities devalued Shin Yunhee's strength and abilities. They did not even take pity on the fact that she had lost her husband, the very soldier who had been sent to his death by the golem. Shin Yunha went to Shin Arim's laboratory and persuaded her to transplant a fragment of the golem into her body. Shin Arim tried to dissuade her from this unknown, but Shin Yunha stood her ground. She was confident in this idea because she had already seen it work on Taijun, but she couldn't tell anyone else about it. Shin Yunha admitted that she was worried and wanted to take responsibility, so she wanted to gain power by transplanting the fragment. Taijun went hunting for the giant red golem and thought about tactics to defeat it. Shin Yunha, who had also come in search of the monster, overheard Taejun's monologue, but fortunately for Taejun, she didn't understand anything. Shin Yunha suspected that Taejun was there to fight the monster, and he confirmed her guess. She kept her arms crossed and asked Taijun to return home. Shin Yunha joked that she would only say that if she didn't know about Taijun's abilities. She suggested that Taejun defeat the giant golem together, but he replied that she would only get in the way and drag him down. Suddenly, Shin Yunha proudly showed Taejun her golem's hand. He was shocked. They decided to discuss their stories and life paths later, as there was no time for chit-chat now. They had to act. Taejun couldn't believe his eyes and didn't understand how she had acquired this hand, but he agreed to join forces with her. They agreed and promised to do everything possible to protect each other and themselves while defeating the golem. Shin Yunha suggested not to delay and attack the golem right away, not realizing that they needed to come up with a plan of action first. She explained her thoughts that she could jump down right now and start the battle. She thought she could defeat the golem with a single blow of her hand, as if by the power of her mind. Taejun explained that she was mistaken and that at the beginning of the journey, he had thought the same thing until he tested his golem powers. He said that nothing had changed in her body except for her strong arm. Shin Yunha was upset because of this. She couldn't believe Taejun's words because she remembered how he saved her, and at that moment, he clearly displayed superpowers. Shin Yunha understood that Taejun was already experienced and knowledgeable about golems, so she decided to listen to him and asked what they should do. Taejun said that the giant golem had a weakness. They had to destroy its blue horn and then it would be gone for good. Shin Yunha thought it would be easy enough to do, but she still didn't understand how to proceed, and Taejun remained mysteriously silent. Taejun had a plan of action ready and wanted to tell Shin Yun about it, but he didn't have time. The golem attacked him, and he had to take immediate action. Taejun was afraid that he would use up all his strength fending off its attacks. He jumped closer to the giant golem and prepared to strike the first blow. But the golem suddenly jumped and began climbing up the walls of the building. Taejun was shocked. This monster was simply defying all the laws of physics. The golem came down on Taejun with a loud crash, and he deftly seized the moment to attack it. Taejun was only able to hit the golem once, but he wanted to reach other parts of its body besides its armor. It was difficult to do so because the golem was incredibly huge. He remembered a game where everything was easier because the boss's health bar was displayed. In real life, however, he had to act without any hints. The golem began to chase him at tremendous speed. Taejun quietly and quickly climbed onto the roof, where Shin Yunha was standing and watching the whole battle. Taejun quickly told Shin Yunha his plan. Time was limited, and the unexpected could happen at any moment. Taejun explained that the golem had 8 types of attacks, but did not go into specifics. He told Shin Yunha how they both should proceed. It was difficult for Taejun to formulate a tactic and explain it to Shin Yonghai, because he understood that the golem was unpredictable and that something could go wrong, but there was no choice and there was nowhere to run. Unfortunately, unlike in the game, in real life, a single blow from the golem could kill you. From the game, Taejun knew that when the golem's horn began to glow, it would start spewing flames from its mouth, but before that, it would freeze for 3 seconds. Taejun explained that he would have to provoke the golem's fiery attack, while Shin Yunha would jump on its head, strike its horn, and destroy it. Shin Yunha had to destroy the horn before the golem started spewing flames. If she failed to do so, Taejun would most likely lose his life due to the intense flow of fire. They continued to discuss the plan, visualizing the situation in their minds and exchanging ideas. Shin Yunha had already jumped on the golem and was trying to attack its horn. Taejun realized that he would not be able to dodge the attack because the golem began to spew flames along the ground rather than in a wide-angle attack. The golem's flames completely engulfed Taejun. He had every chance of going to the other world. Shin Yunha was unable to destroy the giant golem's horn. The horn was very strong and as big as she was. She was overcome with wild fear. The golem sensed what was happening above its head. It grabbed Shin Yunhai in its huge, rough hand and threw her onto the asphalt from a great height. She lay curled up in pain for a few seconds, but found the strength to get up because inaction was very dangerous. She grabbed Taejun, who had miraculously survived the fire, and they decided to flee immediately. The golem caught up with them, already weakened and exhausted by their ordeal, but they managed to break free and hide in a quiet place. Shin Yun-ha and Tae-jun were both seriously injured and survived by a miracle. There was no time to rest, they had to come up with a plan of action. Tae-jun thought that the golem was intelligent in real life and could adapt to the situation, unlike the golems in the game. Tae-jun explained his tactics in case he had to fight alone. When the golem swung its arms, it lowered its head during the third strike. At that moment, he would attack its horn, just as he did in the game. But recently, the golem had not lowered its head to the required height, and this plan had failed. Shin Yun-ha thought this plan was excellent and insisted on implementing it, as no other ideas came to mind. Tae-jun agreed. They prepared to attack the golem, agreeing not to get nervous or overdo it so that everything would go according to plan. Shin Yun-ha boasted beforehand that during her first battle with the golem, she had memorized 4 of its 8 types of attacks. The golem spotted the 2 of them first and began to attack, thus disrupting Shin Yun-ha and Tae-jun's plan. He smashed the asphalt beneath him, forcing them to scatter in different directions. Tae-jun warned Shin Yun-ha that the golem was about to use a fiery attack across the entire ground. They needed to immediately climb as high as possible onto the roof. They ran and jumped at full speed without even pausing to catch their breath, almost to the point of losing consciousness. But the situation did not improve. The golem continued to attack and chase Shin Yun-ho in particular. Due to the wild adrenaline rush, she no longer felt fear and jumped to the ground from a height, repeatedly risking her life. When she landed, she found herself right in front of the golem's huge hand, not yet noticing it. And finally, Shin Yun-ho's long-awaited third strike came. She waited and prepared herself mentally. Tae-jun yelled at her to run away quickly because it was highly unlikely that it would work again, but it was too late. They stopped imagining the whole scenario and returned to a serious conversation. Shin Yun-ha came up with and proposed her own tactic. Shin Yun-ha explained that they needed to work together because if one person simply strengthened their fist, they would not gain the ability to destroy golems. She suggested that one of them block the attack while the other attacked the golem. Tae-jun agreed on the condition that he would be the blocker, as he was the one who understood the golem's movements. If the golem's attack was prolonged again, both of them would risk their lives. They had to act cautiously. They got down to business. Shin Yun-ha gathered all her strength in her fist and tried to stop the golem by confidently holding his arm with her whole body. Putting in even more effort, she actually managed to single-handedly stop and block the giant golem's attack. Tae-jun considered it a reckless attempt, but when he saw what happened with his own eyes, he was shocked and proud of Shin Yun-ha. There was no time to think because for the first time, there was finally a chance to destroy the golem's horn without getting hurt. Tae-jun instantly climbed onto the golem's head and smashed its crystal horn with a couple of powerful blows. It shattered into dozens of small pieces. Thanks to his battles with the golems, Tae-jun earned a lot of money and eventually moved into a new house with his sister. It was a spacious 2-room apartment, and Tae-jun's sister was over the moon with happiness. He could have chosen a much better apartment, but since he was still hiding his abilities from his sister, he decided to buy a normal one so as not to arouse suspicion. 2 months after the battle with the giant golem, Tae-jun thought his life had improved significantly, but he was still tormented by strange feelings. A golem appeared in the Samgakji district, and the authorities issued emergency alerts every day. Tae-jun blamed himself for all the chaos in the city because he had accidentally unleashed it. He remembered how relieved he and Shin Yun-ho had been when they defeated the giant golem. At that time, Tae-jun told her that the situation in the world could worsen with each passing day, and that it was too early to rejoice. That day, he told Shin Yun-ha that the giant golem was the guardian of the gates that opened when he appeared. The monsters that would cross the gates posed a threat. Shin Yun-ha was puzzled as to where Tae-jun got his information about the impending disaster. He refused to explain anything, thus arousing a lot of suspicion. Shin Yun-ha had been feeling very depressed lately. She sat on a bench in the park and waited for Shin Arim. Shin Arim scolded Shin Yun-ha for putting herself under stress when she should have been on sick leave and not straining her arm. She tried to cheer Shin Yun-ha up by telling her that the monsters would soon disappear, but she knew very little about it. Shin Arim said that the video of Shin Yun-ho's battle with the giant golem had gotten 2 million views on the internet. However, Shin Yun-ha did not consider herself popular or cool at all. She considered herself a laughingstock and a disgrace. She realized that she shouldn't have gotten involved in this business and fought against the golem, because thanks to this, monsters appeared that were many times stronger and more powerful. Shin Yun-ha was angry. She didn't think she had fixed the situation and risen in the eyes of the people. She thought she had only become a laughingstock in everyone's eyes. She quickly changed her mind and apologized to Shin Arim for her aggression, but Arim jokingly remarked that this was typical behavior for Shin Yun-ha. They returned to the serious conversation about the research that had brought them together. Shin Arim said that the piece of skin from the first golems had nothing to do with the golems from the second wave of the disaster, but the first golems had almost disappeared. This meant that obtaining the golem's hand and power was now more difficult. The only options were to defeat the few remaining golems or use fragments from the laboratory. Shin Arim and Shin Yun-ha couldn't hide the story of the golem's hand for long, because they still had the stone rat and needed to do something. Shin Yun-ha was afraid to talk about it, but she suggested that Shin Arim do something before it was too late. Taejun was returning home and thinking about the popular video of the battle with the golem. He wasn't in the frame, and no one revealed the existence of his powers. It was strange enough not to be in the frame during such a battle, so he thought it was Shin Yoon-hee's doing, who edited and posted the video. When Taejun arrived home, his sister rushed to show him the live online news broadcast in a panic. The broadcast was hosted by Shin Yoon-ha. She announced that anyone who wanted to could come and apply, after which she would select people to whom she would reveal the secret of her power. Daejun was horrified and bewildered by what he heard. He understood that this was unacceptable because such success could lead to ultimate collapse. Shin Yoon-ha said that the army could no longer cope with the monsters on its own, so measures had to be taken and outsiders had to be brought in. She intended to recruit volunteers, tell them the secret of her power, and even grant this power to a few of them. Meanwhile, groups of miners continued to brazenly enrich themselves from battles with the golems. They hired people to cut gold from the golden golem, which they sent into a secret room. But this was their illegal plan. They promised the hired workers that they would share the money after their work, but in the end, they took absolutely everything for themselves. As soon as the hired workers entered the room, it began to fill with smoke, and the miners quickly locked the door. The workers began to cough and slowly suffocate, and the sensor reacted to them, and the gold scattered into small particles throughout the room. The hired workers quickly passed away, and the miners, with smiles and joy, collected every piece of gold. One of the miners had a change of heart and scolded his colleague for doing such a terrible thing, but the other replied that they were not guilty of anything and were only getting paid. This man had no humanity. He was only trying to get rich through illegal business. He believed that he could live comfortably thanks to such actions. The miners talked about a popular video and heard rumors that it had been edited. They talked about Taejun as a guy who had abilities identical to those of Shin Yoon-hee. The miner thought it would be a great idea to involve Taejun in their misdeeds. Meanwhile, Taejun continued to easily fight the golden golems alone and earn money from it. 5 months had passed since Namsan's disappearance, and Taejun already had the opportunity to buy a nice house, but unfortunately, his sister was an obstacle to this. Taejun recalled with horror how he had been deceived by swindlers, how he had become mired in debt, and how he had no idea how he would live on. Nevertheless, he still managed to get out of this situation, earn many times more, and feel happy even in the midst of global chaos. He decided not to think about it because he didn't consider himself to be at fault for everything that was happening. Taejun heard wild, loud noises and the scream of some guy. Turning around, he saw something. A new golem from the second wave of the disaster was chasing the unknown guy at tremendous speed. Quickly orienting himself, Taejun grabbed an iron beam and threw it at the golem, destroying it. Ta-jun himself was shocked by what he saw. With just one blow from the beam, he was able to destroy the huge stone golem. It was strange and unbelievable. The guy thanked Taejun for saving him and wanted to repay him somehow. But Taejun politely declined and asked the guy to leave this place as soon as possible so as not to encounter new danger. Taejun walked away and the guy stood there, puzzled by his words because Taejun was alone, just like him. Taejun's sister was relaxing at home when she suddenly heard someone ring the doorbell. The stranger said he was there to see Taejun, and his sister was surprised because they weren't expecting anyone, and no one knew where their house was. This man wearing a mask and glasses introduced himself as Taejun's girlfriend. It was the first time in a long time that his sister had been so shocked. At that time, Taejun was sitting in his room thinking about possibly buying a car soon. His sister called Taejun to come out to the unknown guest. At first, he didn't understand who it could be. The stranger turned out to be Shin Yoon-ha. They went outside and Taejun began to question her about how she had found his house. She admitted that she had used government authorities to do so, which made Taejun very angry. He asked her to stop trying to play detective and scolded her for introducing herself as his girlfriend to his sister. Shin Yoon-ha justified this by saying that she had been attentive enough to his words and requests, and that she couldn't reveal this secret to his family. He argued that Shin Yoon-ha's secretive behavior only made the situation worse, and now his sister was even more suspicious of Taejun. Because of her work in the media, Shin Yoon-ha was known throughout the country, and she didn't know how else to hide. But Taejun said that in that case, she might as well not come at all. She wanted to discuss some matters face-to-face with Taejun. He didn't think they had anything left to talk about. Shin Yoon-ha repented and promised not to stick her nose where it didn't belong anymore. She was no longer going to beg Taejun for anything, because he wasn't telling her anything, and she didn't want to waste time on useless arguments. She understood that he had personal reasons for keeping all knowledge and information about the situation secret, so she respected his silence. Nevertheless, Shin Yoon-ha wanted Taejun to take at least some responsibility. Shin Yoon-ha decided this because Taejun had told her about the second disaster in advance. That meant he was definitely involved. Taejun himself did not fully understand whether he could blame himself. Was it really because of his game update and not something else? But he knew that if such a connection really existed, he had to take responsibility, even though he didn't know about it in advance. After thinking for a while, Taejun asked Shin Yoon-ha how he could take responsibility. Shin Yoon-ha reminded him of her announcement that she intended to share her power with selected volunteers. She said she wanted to create a combat unit from these volunteers and add Taejun to it. She promised that Taejun would be immediately registered as selected and would not be questioned about his knowledge or the origin of his powers. Shin Yunha did all this for the good of the people. Taejun had to take responsibility for those who had already passed away and for those who could be protected. After asking him to think carefully about it, Shin Yunha left and gave Taejun 3 days to think it over. That evening, after going out hunting once again, Taejun sat on the street and thought about what was happening. Lately, luck had not been on his side. His thoughts were interrupted again by a sudden scream and a loud crash. It was the cry of the same boy running away from the stone golem. Taejun even had a feeling of déjà vu. He shouted at the boy to run to him immediately and had already thought out his plan of action. Taejun quickly took the bat out of the boy's backpack and ran to attack the golem. As before, he managed to destroy the stone golem with his first blow. The guy sincerely thanked Taejun again for saving his life for the second time in 2 days. He was shocked by the power of Taejun's blow and couldn't understand how he was able to defeat the golem so easily with just a bat. The guy even nervously joked that if he attacked the golem with a bat himself, only the bat would suffer, not the golem. In reality, it wasn't that simple, and Taejun only pretended to hit the golem with the bat to hide the fact that he had attacked it with his golem hand. Taejun asked the guy why he had made the same mistake and returned to this place again. The guy asked him a counter question. Taejun had to make up an excuse that he was actually part of a combat group that he had left for a day. The guy expressed his envy to Taejun because he also dreamed of being in a group and having power, but thought that no one would accept him into the team. He explained that all the guilds were currently full, and even if he managed to get in, as a newbie, he would only be assigned menial tasks. Taejun advised him to gain experience first, but the guy got angry because he wanted to earn money right here and now. The guy stopped Taejun and pitifully asked him to help and take him in. He begged him for help because more than anything else in the world, he dreamed of knowing and feeling what it was like to have incredible power and be rich because of it. Laughing at this, Taejun said that the guy was useless in battle. Taejun had no desire or inclination to help him, so he said goodbye and walked away again. The blonde man who once saved Taejun and left him gold sat and looked through the recent news about Shin Yun-hee with his student. The student asked if the teacher was planning to apply to be a volunteer. He said with obvious aggression that he had not even thought of doing so, but the student could see that he was very interested in it. The teacher replied that even if he did, he would have to work exclusively undercover. The student assumed that the teacher had something to hide since he said that, but he tried to change the subject and asked her not to distract him from his work. She said that there were rumors about 2 owners of powers, and one of them was the teacher. Upon learning about the second owner of powers, he was greatly shocked. The student said that according to the rumors, the second owner sold drugs that gave people power. The teacher was very surprised by this, as he did not think that people could still be fooled by such nonsense. Only a few people knew that the second owner was one of the miners who, for the sake of his own enrichment, deceived people and locked them in a room filled with gas. The drug was smoke in a test tube that the miners made themselves and which suffocated all the people who had been deceived. The miners were happy that their plans were going exactly as they wanted. They had no qualms about earning money through illegal means and did not feel the slightest bit of pity for the deceived people as they looked at their lifeless bodies. The boy had been pestering Taejun for days, asking to join his team. But Taejun refused again because he didn't want to take any risks and hunt golems with someone who was of no use. The boy did not understand why Taejun was so adamant, since he had already defeated them twice on his own. Taejun justified himself by saying that these golems were already badly damaged, but the guy continued to insist on his point and refute Taejun's words. This really pissed him off. Suddenly, large steel dogs that had never been seen in the city before surrounded Taejun and the guy from all sides. Taejun couldn't even imagine what to do now. He couldn't handle all the dogs with just one hand, not to mention that annoying guy. He asked the guy to introduce himself, and he said his name was Quan Jin Yang. Taejun immediately explained to Jin Yang that he couldn't handle all the dogs, so they had to escape through the holes in the walls. Taejun also promised to try to clear the way for them, and they immediately set to work. As he ran, he remembered that in the game, the steel dogs were strong and fast, and only inflicted damage with their teeth. But they weren't that big, which meant they were lighter and much easier to defeat than the golems. Jin Young listened to Taejun's instructions and followed him. Taejun didn't have to use his strength because he was pushing the dogs away with Jin Young's bat. They almost escaped, but one dog still caught up with them and tried to attack Jin Yang. Taejun acted decisively and skillfully, quickly inserting the bat into the dog's mouth to block its actions. He told Jin Young not to worry about him and to get out of there as quickly as possible. The dog's teeth were so strong and sharp that within seconds it completely bit through and broke the bat. Meanwhile, Jin Young managed to open the hatch in the ground and called for Taejun to climb in quickly. But as soon as Taejun reached the hatch, the steel dog caught up with him and almost jumped on his back. The dog instantly grabbed Taejun's golem arm with its mouth and almost bit through it. No matter how hard Taejun tried to avoid it until that moment, he had to damage the dog with his powerful blow. After that, he quickly jumped into the hatch and closed it with relief. Taejun told Jin Yang that they couldn't waste another second and had to get out of there as soon as possible. They got out through another hatch and breathed a sigh of relief. Jin Yang noticed that all these terrible events had lasted quite a long time today. It was already 2 in the morning. Just like last time, Taejun asked Shin Yun-ho, and this time he asked Jin Young to forget everything he had seen. He warned that if anyone found out about what had happened today, he would take revenge on Jin Young by any means necessary. He also promised that he would pay for the broken bat the next time they met. After that, Taejun turned around and left. Jin Young remained standing there, lost in thought. Now he wanted even more to have the same powers. Suddenly, he received a text message on his phone about drugs. At night, the miners threw lifeless bodies into the same huge pit from which the monsters emerged. One of the miners even joked that maybe they themselves were creating these monsters by throwing lifeless bodies into the pit. Shin Yun-ha visited Taejun again and told him about rumors of a user with a hidden ability who sells drugs. She said that these rumors were specifically about Taejun, although he had never heard of such a thing before. Taejun didn't understand why Shin Yun-ha had come again and why she was telling him all this. She explained that she planned to work with him to catch the person who was impersonating Taejun and making money off of it. Shin Yun-ha again spoke about their responsibility for the people who would fall for the dealer's trick, since Taejun was hiding his identity. Shin Yun-ha kept talking about responsibility, explaining that it helped her stay sane. A whole crowd of people gathered to get the strength-giving drug. These people were promised that they would forget their fear of monsters once and for all and, thanks to the miracle drug, would be able to fight them in no time. Among these people was Jin Young. He was afraid that the drug might not work and that he would have wasted a large amount of money. A man from the crowd overheard Jin Young muttering to himself and said that he had even taken out a loan to pay for the drug. They started talking and decided to keep each other company so that it would be easier to calm down at such an exciting moment. The man thought it would be a small gathering, but a lot of people showed up. He became more and more convinced that it was probably true. He pointed out to Jin Young a group of 3 secretive people wearing caps, masks, and glasses. They were Taejun and Shin Yun-ha, who had decided to check who and what was behind the drug trade. Standing next to them was an unknown person wearing the same outfit. The situation became more complicated when Taejun noticed Jin Yang in the crowd. Taejun did not consider himself responsible for everything that was happening in the world, and agreed to go out of curiosity. He wanted to know who this self-proclaimed user was. The dealers checked to see if everyone had received the drug and asked them to take it right away. At that moment, Taejun instantly had terrible suspicions about the drug. The stranger standing next to Taejun and Shin Yun-ho raised his hand and asked the dealers a question. He asked them for proof of the drug's effectiveness, because people are usually afraid to take suspicious substances just like that. Shin Yun-ho and Taejun wondered what had brought this stranger there, but they had no idea who he was or why he was hanging around them. He was hiding just like them, and this made Taejun very wary. As proof, the merchant showed the crowd his golem's hand. People immediately began to admire him and blindly believe the merchant's words and actions. Taejun thought that the hand did look realistic, but nevertheless it could only be an imitation. Shin Yun-ha seemed to read Taejun's thoughts. She immediately understood and asked the merchant to demonstrate his abilities. Already starting to get nervous, the merchant said that he understood people's suspicions and that he could break an iron pole with his hand. Without much effort, he managed to punch a large hole in the pole with a single blow, and of course, most people trusted him even more. After this blow, the merchant tried not to show that his hand hurt very badly, because the golem's hand was just a fake he had bought. Laughing nervously, the merchant asked the people if they now believed in his abilities and the effectiveness of the drug. Taejun immediately shouted that it was impossible to believe such a ridiculous performance. He threw a stone at the merchant, asking him to crush the stone instead of putting on a show with the pole. If he succeeded, then they would believe him. The merchant's face showed intense tension and anger. This was the first time he had encountered such people. Before that, everyone had fallen for the trick with the pole. The merchant began to panic, which was exactly what Taejun had expected. That's when he figured him out. Suddenly, the show was interrupted by the merchant's accomplice, who barely made it there, covered in wounds and blood. He mumbled something and asked for help, then collapsed on the floor. He mumbled something about the lifeless bodies they had thrown away. The people present panicked and screamed. The man barely managed to say that these bodies had become monsters and were now approaching them. In front of everyone, the merchant pretended not to understand what bodies he was talking about. No one could believe it, but within seconds, a bunch of mutilated zombies really did make their way into the room. The people were in a state of wild terror. Shin Yun-ha, Taejun, and the third stranger just stood there, confused and unsure of what to do. The man Jin Yang had met already understood that they needed to get out of there as quickly as possible and not linger for a second. The crowd rushed to the merchant with pleas for help, believing that he was a user of the ability and could defeat all the zombies. He became enraged and only reminded them that they still had drugs that could give them the strength to attack the monsters. And the people continued to blindly believe this, even sighing with relief and already intending to take the substance. Taejun, Shin Yun-ha, and the stranger were confused and panicked just like everyone else. Shin Yun-ha tried to calm people down, but almost no one heard her. The so-called ability user looked at what was happening with fear and ran away. He understood that after what had happened, no one would leave him alone. Jin Young wanted to take the drug as soon as possible and gain power, but the man dissuaded him from doing so without knowing the consequences. He wanted to warn the others, but it was too late. One by one, people began to pour the drug into their mouths. They were immediately delighted that they now possessed strength, even though no changes had occurred in their bodies. But after a few seconds, they began to cough and choke, which was exactly what needed to be proven. Taejun remembered that in the game, this drug was called Stone Blossom, and now it had materialized in real life. Shin Yun-ha wasted no time and began beating each zombie with her golem hand. At the same time, she shouted and asked everyone present to calm down and stop panicking so much. She revealed her identity and said that she was the well-known Captain Shin Yun-ha. Shin Yun-ha also promised everyone that she would stop these monsters and ordered people to behave calmly and look for a way out. People were happy to hear this news and calmed down a little as they were grateful to Shin Yun-ha. She bravely fought each zombie while Taejun thought about what he could do now to avoid revealing himself and help her. Suddenly, one of the zombies grabbed Shin Yun-ha right by her arm. That's when Taejun rushed to her aid, knocking the monster away from her with one powerful blow. Now, Shin Yun-ha felt more confident because it was easier to fight together, and she was grateful to Taejun for his concern. Taejun promised to use a club as a weapon without turning his hand into a golems, as the zombies were not stronger than the golems. He explained that these zombies were just lifeless bodies, and that the real monsters were the bugs on the backs of their heads. Therefore, the first thing to do was to get rid of the bugs. Shin Yun-ha was again puzzled as to how he knew all this. The third stranger stood there all this time, doing nothing and saying nothing, just watching what was happening. One of the crowd found an emergency exit, and the people's joy knew no bounds. They rushed to flee the building, not suspecting that they would encounter more problems. But then a huge faceless stone golem appeared before the happy people, and it had already managed to send some of them to the other world. Shin Yun-ha and Taejun continued to deal with the monsters in the building. They heard strange cries from the street, but did not pay any attention to them. Taejun warned that it would be better to deal with them now so that things wouldn't get worse later, but Shin Yun-ha left half of them to him and ran out into the street. He thought that it wasn't so bad and that he would be able to improve his technique by fighting these zombies. And if the situation worsened, Taejun could calmly use his arm when no one else was watching. The people on the street froze in place at the sight and, out of fear, did not know where to go. Suddenly, the golem began attacking them with blows to the ground and everyone scattered in different directions. The man tried to protect Jin Young, but he shouted that the golem was approaching him from behind. He was already prepared and intended to destroy both of them with one blow. Shin Yun-ha ran out at the sound of people screaming and was shocked by what she saw. The man who was helping Jin Young took off his black wig and turned out to be the blonde man with the ability who once saved Taejun. He tried with all his might to hide it until the last moment, but the time came when he had to fight the golem in front of everyone. The blonde man prepared his hand and gathered his thoughts before the difficult battle. First, he asked Jin Young if everything was okay and helped him up. He asked him to quickly move away and evacuate with the rest of the people. The people, including Shin Yun-ha, were shocked to see the blonde man, who was now a real user of the ability that no one had known about before. Meanwhile, Taejun continued to successfully fight each bug on the zombies' heads inside the room. There were still quite a few left, but despite this, Taejun easily defeated even 2 at once. During the battle, Taejun thought about how he wanted to become even stronger after fighting the dogs. As the number of monsters increased, he thought that people would spread and use their powers or develop weapons against the golems. For Taejun, this meant only one thing. The number of his rivals would increase, and he feared losing his supremacy more than anything else. He continued to destroy the bugs and realized that knowledge would be the answer and solution for him. He was the only one who possessed not only strength, but also knowledge. Therefore, Taejun decided to devote even more time to studying the character's behavior and developing personal tactics. He had already been practicing everything he had learned over and over again, but now he was eager to practice even more. Taejun knew that as long as the zombies were much slower, he would be able to defeat absolutely everyone without exception. Finally, there was only one zombie left in the room, and Taejun took a short break before finishing it off. Outside, the blonde man's extraordinary battle with the new golem continued. The blonde man used his powers diligently, causing the golem's body to shatter into dozens of pieces. Shin Yun-ha remembered Taejun's words that the user of the power was no different from others except for his hand. But after what she saw, she couldn't believe that such a golem could really be defeated, using only one strong arm. The blonde man was also able to jump very high, so he easily dodged attacks and inflicted even more damage on the golem. After dealing with the last zombie, Taejun breathed a sigh of relief and decided to get out onto the street as well. From the powerful attacks of the mighty blonde, the golem began to split in half and into many small pieces. Shin Yun-ha was very impressed by how unrealistically and easily the blonde man fought. For a second, she even thought it was a dream, but her thoughts were interrupted by a slap on the head from Taejun. He said that Shin Yun-ha deserved it for leaving him alone in the room with the zombies. Taejun froze and stared wide-eyed at the powerful blonde man. They looked into each other's eyes, and Taejun slowly realized that this was the same rescuer. For a few more minutes, they continued to stare at each other mysteriously, not even knowing what to say. The blonde man spoke first and regretted revealing his identity so quickly and easily. He asked if there were many monsters left inside the building. Shin Yun-ha replied that they had successfully defeated every zombie. The blonde man was very surprised and asked how Shin Yun-ha managed to deal with them all on her own. Now Taejun took off his mask and joined the conversation, saying that he had dealt with them himself. After hearing this, the blonde man was shocked and exclaimed that he had come from the past. Taejun's face seemed very familiar to him, but he didn't think he could have met him somewhere before. The blonde man lowered his head and covered it with his hands. Afraid that Taijun would now remember him, he blamed himself for appearing in a crowded place at the wrong time, even though he had defeated the golem and saved people. Shin Yunha didn't understand what was going on and wondered if they knew each other. Taijun admitted that the blonde man had helped him once, but they were not acquainted with each other. He was upset that Taijun had managed to remember him, but there was no point in regretting what had happened. The blonde man was happy that Taijun had recovered after his help, and was glad to see him like that. Taijun kindly thanked the blonde man for his past actions and shook his hand. The blonde man then praised him for his courage and for personally defeating all the monsters inside. He noted that 3 power holders had gathered at the same time in one place, and that was cool. He also asked how they learned about the way to gain power. Regrettably, Taijun said that he could hardly reveal this information to him. He asked the blonde man if he could give a truthful answer to the same question, but in the opposite situation. At that moment, the blonde man became nervous and thought for a moment, before replying that he probably wouldn't be able to reveal this information either. These words alarmed Taijun, and it became clear that the blonde man was clearly hiding something significant. Not getting an answer to the first question, the blonde man decided to ask another one and asked if he knew a man named Yu Jin-ho. Taijun froze and couldn't say a word. The blonde man said that he never expected to see the leader here, and couldn't imagine where he knew him from. This conversation greatly alarmed Shin Yun-ho, and she decided to intervene. She asked Taijun to help her catch the fugitive swindlers who were selling the drug. He resisted, but Shin Yun-ho took him by the hand, saying that it would be easy for him to help, and led him away, saying goodbye to the blonde man. They left, and the blonde man was left alone with his questions, which remained unanswered. Taijun didn't understand why Shin Yun-ha decided to act this way in this situation. She immediately asked who this Yu Jin-ho was that they were talking about. Taijun remained silent, not knowing what to say. Not hearing an answer, Shin Yun-ha resigned herself to it and said that she was already used to getting answers to her questions out of him. She also advised Taijun to stay away from the blonde man if he wanted to keep the secret. Shin Yun-ha came to this conclusion because the blonde guy's vibe changed noticeably when he realized that Taijun knew this Yu Jin-ho guy. She admitted that if she were in the blonde guy's place, she would continue to watch Taijun. Taijun admitted that he also felt hostility and a negative aura from the blonde man. Shin Yun-ha changed her mind and asked him to come back. He was puzzled because he had already sighed after a tense conversation with the blonde man and was ready to search for the scammers. But Shin Yun-ha insisted that she had said all that just to get Taijun out of there and that she could handle it herself. She promised that she would definitely sort everything out and left after saying goodbye to him. After that, Taijun went to the hole where Namsan used to be alone with his thoughts. He understood that he owed Shin Yun-ha nothing, but he also wanted to know how the scammers were involved in the Stone Blossom drug from the game. Turning around, Taijun was startled to see a blonde man standing behind him. The blonde man apologized and admitted that he had been following him in order to get information about Yu Jin-ho. This angered Taijun, but he agreed to tell him only if the blonde man told him where he knew the name from and why he was looking for him. The blonde man became agitated and said that they were beating around the bush and he was not satisfied with how things were going. The blonde man transformed his hand into a golem and warned that he would extract all the information, even if he had to use force. He claimed that he was in a state of extreme despair and could not talk about himself at that moment. Most of all, Taijun was shocked by such unprecedented rudeness. He also transformed his hand and told the man to do whatever he wanted. Taking a step closer, the blonde man asked Taijun if he still did not want to tell him everything. Taijun was not afraid of his threats and also took a step towards him. Taijun said he owed him nothing. He didn't want to share any information, so he decided to show his strength. Until that moment, he had only fought monsters and didn't know what it would be like with a human. Remembering that this cocky blonde's abilities were different when he saved him, Taijun thought he had no chance against him. He had already gathered his thoughts to tell him everything when he lunged at him with the first blow. At that moment, Taijun became enraged and had no choice but to fight back. Without hesitation, he grabbed the blonde by the hair and pulled him toward him. Then he pushed him away and was about to strike him with a golem fist. But the blonde managed to dodge deftly and quickly and struck Taijun himself. Both of them were so angry and threw themselves at each other that they had no intention of stopping the fight. The asphalt cracked beneath them. With tremendous force and a loud thud, Taijun and the blonde man punched each other in the fist, causing themselves severe pain. Shin Yun-ha, unaware of anything, was walking through the forest in search of the scammers. She realized that this was a shitty idea and that she should have asked Taijun for help instead of showing off. At that moment, Shin Yun-ha thought about the blonde man's negative aura and hoped that he wouldn't do anything bad. Suddenly, she noticed a stranger walking along the path in the forest, wearing the same cap as the man who had been standing third next to her and Taijun in the building. Deciding to follow him, she quietly walked behind him and eventually saw the man enter a warehouse. For a moment, Taijun and the blonde man moved away from each other and stopped to catch their breath. Taijun realized that this man was indeed very strong, but everything was going much better than he had imagined. He was also worried about Shin Yun-hee and whether she had been able to find the scammers. The blonde man sighed and said that fighting a person was quite troublesome because you had to control your strength so as not to accidentally send him to the other world. He admitted that Taijun was stronger than he thought, which meant he had to put in a little more effort, but Taijun was already scared of that. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to withstand it if Taijun used even more force. Suddenly, the blonde man lunged at Taejun again, who had not even had time to recover from the first fight. The blonde man's eyes lit up with a very bright blue color, and with frenzied aggression, he punched Taejun directly in the face with his golem fist. The blow was so strong and merciless that Taejun lost his balance and fell onto the asphalt. He was so shocked by this guy and felt so much pain that he almost lost consciousness. Taejun was surprised that he called it just a little more strength. He himself would never dare to do that to a person and would control his strength. But unfortunately, Taejun's intuition did not fail him, and the blonde's position was different. Taejun believed that he would not win even if he used his hidden power. The blonde man stood and suggested that Taejun continue the fight, waiting for him to get up. Anger got the better of Taejun, and he didn't want to lose so easily in front of him. He decided that now was the time to use his hidden power. There were two crooks in the warehouse, and one of them suggested wrapping up their work. The second said that he was not going to give up so easily and that he had already thought of a plan for such a case. He grinned, hoping that when the commotion subsided, he would go into the building and take the gold that was rightfully his. Turning around, the crooks saw a stranger standing in the doorway and were very frightened. One of them immediately rushed up to him with questions about how he had found the place and why he was following them. The stranger said he wanted to find out some information, hoping that they would calmly tell him everything. He asked how and from whom they had bought the medicines they claimed to be power-giving substances. The swindlers immediately began to mock him with jokes after this question, unwilling to tell him anything. The stranger got angry that they didn't want to cooperate and punched one of the swindlers in the face. The second swindler witnessed this and was horrified, as he did not expect him to resort to such actions. To get them to feel sorry for him, the injured swindler fell to the floor and writhed in pain. After a minute of silence, the stranger said that he had asked them to calmly tell him everything, but instead they immediately started joking around. At that moment, Shin Yunha dared to enter the warehouse. She was stunned by what she saw. She saw the stranger holding the swindler by the neck and about to do something to him. Shin Yunha interrupted them with a question about what was going on. The stranger was surprised to see her, but he knew he had business with her too. He said he wanted to ask her a couple of questions and asked her to answer honestly. At that time, Taejun and the blonde man were still fighting, landing powerful blows on each other. Taejun decided to resort to his hidden ability, the crystal, because he was no match for the blonde man. These were crystals from the game. When a player defeats a monster, they receive a crystal that can be used to increase their skills. The crystal's effect lasted for a limited time. Taejun thought that this ability had no place in real life, but he changed his mind when he saw it appear. He took the crystal out of his pocket and held it right in front of the blonde man's face, who froze at the sight of the unknown object. Taejun raised the crystal a little higher and activated it. The crystal began to glow softly, which frightened the blonde man greatly. This object was called a fireball crystal guard dog, embodying fiery breath. But to use it, he needed more space, so Taejun moved back a little. The blonde man was puzzled by his strange actions. Now Taejun was able to fully activate the ball and threw it straight at the blonde man's face. The fire spread and created a kind of wall of flames between the two of them. Watching this whole scene, Taejun thought that even such a powerful technique would be useless against the blonde man. While the fireball immobilized him, Taejun wanted to prepare his next tactic, but suddenly he saw the blonde man escape from the fire and fall to the ground from lack of air. Rising slightly, the blonde man slammed his fist into the already cracked ground beneath Taejun. The ground split completely, the stone slabs began to collapse, and Taejun could also fall off the cliff. Frightened by what had happened, the blonde man quickly reached out his hand to Taejun to help him hold on. Taejun tried to reach for him, realizing that in a few seconds he would most likely lose his life. In the warehouse, the stranger told Shin Yunha that the question was simple and asked her how she had gained her power. Shin Yunha explained that she had nothing to say, and if he really wanted to know something, he should take a selection test. After her words, the stranger lunged at her with a blow and shouted that they were all forcing answers out of them. Shin Yunha was able to defend herself with her hands and dodge his blow to the head. The stranger stepped back and she asked him where he had learned such techniques. He remained silent, but he thought that since Shin Yunha instantly took a defensive position when he tried to strike her, it meant that she also had skills. Without waiting for an answer, Shin Yunha attacked the stranger with blows, challenging him to defend himself as she had defended herself. She also noted that she was simply defending herself because he had attacked her first. She hit him again on the head and he stepped back a little and prepared to kick her in the face. Shin Yunha reacted quickly and dodged the blow, falling to the floor. After that, she skillfully attacked the stranger again, who wanted to take advantage of her position while she was still on the floor. He got scared, coughed for some reason, and started running away from Shin Yunha. Finally, he shouted that one day he would definitely find out how to gain power and quickly left the warehouse. Shin Yunhee ran after him and regretted that she had let this suspicious person get away so easily. But she didn't get too upset because she understood that he was planning to gain power, which meant they would meet again. Nevertheless, judging by his actions, she understood that he would definitely not use his power for the good of the people. Not only did he want to gain power for evil deeds, but so did the scammers he attacked. Shin Yunha wondered what they wanted to achieve. She also wondered if she would be able to filter out the bad people during the selection process, even if they passed the test. Taejun woke up and couldn't understand or remember where he was because his head hurt so much. He began to remember that the floor had collapsed during the fight, and assumed that he was now at the bottom of that very pit. But suddenly Taejun's thoughts about how he survived were interrupted by the blonde man, who was happy that he had woken up. Taejun was surprised to see him there, but his face lit up when he realized he wasn't alone. The blonde man explained that he had managed to grab Taejun when he started to fall, and they had fallen off the cliff together. With slight anger and sarcasm, Taejun thanked the blonde man for catching him and for breaking the floor with his desire to destroy Taejun. But the blonde man explained that he was very hot from the fire that Taejun himself had started, which is why the blonde man couldn't calculate his strength. Taejun found it hard to believe that the blonde man had rushed to save him during the fight, so he considered this man to be quite unusual. He didn't understand and asked the blonde man where they were, but he couldn't answer. It was a dark cave with torches on the walls. Looking around the cave, Taejun began to realize that he had seen this place somewhere before. In a panic, he ran to the open door, which he already knew something about from the game. The blonde man followed Taejun, and they both froze, horror flooding their eyes. Behind the door, they saw a very deep mine shaft below that they had not seen before and knew nothing about. Taejun couldn't believe his eyes. This mine was identical to the one he had seen in Shadow Dungeon. Neither of them understood how the shaft could be located directly under the cliff. The blonde even doubted whether they were still alive. But Taejun understood that all this was happening in real life, because dozens of events from the game had already taken place in it. They decided to go further into the cave to explore, as there was no point or reason to stay in one place. Since there was no choice, Taejun decided to try to act according to the game's plot. Suddenly he fell, narrowly avoiding a trap in the form of long spikes that sprang out when he tried to cross a certain boundary. He remembered that if the mine was identical to the one in the game, there would be many traps here and it would be worth being more careful. This was dangerous because Taejun mainly remembered the locations of the monsters and not all the traps in detail. Because of this, Taejun found it difficult to calm down and began to doubt whether he had any chance of surviving and getting out of there. When she woke up in the morning, Taejun's sister woke up and didn't understand why Taejun was still asleep, since he usually woke up first. She went to wake him up and look for him in all the rooms, but he was nowhere to be found in the house. This alarmed his sister greatly because Taejun had not returned and had not even warned her, nor was he answering his phone. His sister was very worried and even began to panic. Meanwhile, Taejun and the blonde man were already fighting the stone golems they encountered on their way. There were several golems at once, but fortunately, it was much easier to fight together than alone. For the most part, it was the blonde man who managed to defeat all the golems quickly and without significant loss of strength. But Taejun also fought very skillfully, improving his tactics and increasing his strength with each battle. After dealing with a large number of golems, they breathed a sigh of relief. Moving on, Taejun couldn't believe that he was still alive and unharmed. Due to his vague memories, Taejun was quite worried, but he managed to avoid all the traps and stay alive. He believed that the main reason for this was the blonde man's strength, as he had helped him and was able to destroy some traps that Taejun didn't even remember. Although they promised each other not to ask any questions until they got out of the cave, Taejun was very curious about some facts. Suddenly, out of nowhere, someone's very long pink tongue appeared and Taejun grabbed it. It was the tongue of a new small monster from the cave. Taejun pulled on its tongue so that it couldn't cause any harm with it. This monster was a stone frog, and Taejun knew that if they had already encountered a frog, they were almost at the exit. The blonde man and Taejun suggested they take a short break and sit down. Thinking that it was the perfect moment to get acquainted, the blonde man suggested that Taejun do so and introduced himself as Lee Soo-hyuk. Taejun clearly didn't like this idea and introduced himself as Iron Man. Both became enraged, and Taejun said he was not obligated to give his real name. Lee Soo-hyuk decided that if he didn't want to introduce himself, then he didn't have to. He promised that he would call Taejun Iron Man. Deciding to ignore this, Lee Soo-hyuk asked Taejun if they would definitely be able to get out if they only went down the mine. He replied that he couldn't know for sure and that there were no other roads except the one down, just as there was no choice. But Lee Soo-hyuk still couldn't imagine how they would eventually get out, although he understood that this place was already very unrealistic. They reached another dark passage in the cave, and Taejun asked them to get ready and prepare for it. The golem appeared before them again, but this one was many times larger and more powerful. Both Soo-hyuk and Taejun were frightened and quickly gathered their strength and collected their thoughts for battle. Taejun remembered that this monster was a decoy. Suddenly, a long tongue stretched out of the cave again and broke the huge golem in half. Neither of them knew what to expect, but Lee Soo-hyuk correctly guessed that it was the tongue of a giant frog hiding inside the cave, and Taejun confirmed his thoughts. They approached the cave, pressing themselves against the wall. Lee Soo-hyuk asked why they were walking that way. Taejun replied that if they walked in the center, the tongue would be able to attack them. But Lee Soo-hyuk didn't understand why Taejun was walking behind him, if he could just as easily walk on the opposite wall. Taejun proudly replied that if the tongue attacked them again, Lee Soo-hyuk would serve as his shield. Out of a certain aggression caused by such statements, they delivered a powerful blow, fist to fist. Turning around and not having time to prepare, they froze in horror. Before them stood a huge stone hippopotamus. Taejun quickly tried to ask Lee Soo-hyuk if he remembered the tactics he had told him about. But there was no time left for discussion. The huge toad began its attack. The stone toad flicked out its long tongue, and Lee Soo-hyuk and Taejun ran to either side of it to inflict damage. Lee Soo-hyuk almost got caught in the tongue attack, but quickly remembered that it was better not to get close to the toad's face. He intended to outrun and outsmart it, but it blocked his path by striking the ground with its paws. At the same time, Lee Soo-hyuk was amazed at Taejun's ability to skillfully dodge the toad's attacks. He was more cunning than he had expected. Taejun confidently dodged the attacks, but it was quite difficult for him to attack. The huge toad smashed the ground beneath it, flicked its tongue, and made it impossible to attack. It was dangerous, but Taejun tried to distract the toad from Lee Soo-hyuk by teasing it and drawing its attention to himself. Meanwhile, Lee Soo-hyuk acted according to plan and jumped on its head. He struck the toad hard and destroyed one of the red stones on its forehead with his finger. Lee Soo-hyuk was proud of himself, but it was too early to rejoice. He had to keep going. The stone toad continued to attack with its tongue, and he thought he had not damaged it, but Taejun comforted him, saying that he had done everything according to plan. He explained to Soo-hyuk that the toad's weakness was the 5 red stones on its forehead. To defeat the toad, he had to destroy each of them. Taejun said that they had to repeat this 4 more times, and then they could breathe a sigh of relief. The toad continued to attack them with its tongue and try to strike them, but they fought it confidently and destroyed 3 more stones. Delighted, Lee Soo-hyuk thought that now they would destroy the last stone and rest. But Taejun knew that this was not the end. He explained that the last time would be special. He had not finished speaking when the toad suddenly launched a misty attack from its mouth. Now they had to fight in the fog. As Taejun explained, this was the second phase. Lee Soo-hyuk had no strength or desire left. The stone toad flicked its tongue in the fog, making it impossible to see, so it was extremely difficult to dodge. Lee Soo-hyuk did not understand how it managed to aim its tongue so skillfully at him. He ran into the fog and tried to attack the toad with blows when he suddenly realized that he was punching the air. The toad again sharply flicked its tongue at Taejun and Lee Soo-hyuk, who found it increasingly difficult to dodge. Taejun explained that Lee Soo-hyuk was only seeing a mirage, a false image in the fog, and not the real silhouette of the toad. But he couldn't believe that such a thing was possible in real life, and didn't understand why Taejun was saying this. He asked Lee Soo-hyuk not to give in to these illusions and to simply move in the direction of the toad's tongue. He understood him and, not wanting to waste any more time, ran forward toward the toad. Taejun was afraid that something might go wrong, but Lee Soo-hyuk could not be stopped. The toad attacked him repeatedly, but he continued to skillfully dodge and run forward with burning eyes. Taejun watched him break through and was shocked by his abilities. He even wondered if Lee Soo-hyuk was human at all. Lee Soo-hyuk ran up to the toad, jumped on its head, and delivered a powerful blow to the last red stone. He jumped down proudly and rejoiced at what had happened. He watched to see what would happen next. The huge toad began to instantly dissolve into thin air, and even larger round stones fell out of its head. At first, Soo-hyuk watched all this in silence, but then he shouted at the top of his voice that he had finally won. While Soo-hyuk was resting, Taejun looked at him and realized how strong he was, and how much easier it was with him. He thought that he himself would not have been able to do it. He wondered how Soo-hyuk had become so strong, and whether Taejun could gain the same strength through training. Getting up, Lee Soo-hyuk picked up the red beads and asked Taejun what kind of stones they were and whether they were precious. Taejun replied that they were probably not just decorations. Taejun thought that he was not obliged to reveal all his knowledge to him, and that some things were worth keeping secret. Taejun suggested that they were similar to fireballs, but he was not sure, so he did not give a definite answer to Lee Soo-hyuk's questions. It didn't matter what they were, but it was good that there were 2 stones, and Lee Soo-hyuk suggested that they each take one. Taejun was surprised by this and asked why he was suggesting this, since he had done almost everything in the battle himself. But Lee Soo-hyuk explained that without teamwork and help, nothing would have been possible, and that he would not have been able to do it without Taejun's well-thought-out tactics. Taejun thanked him for this gesture and recognition, but deep down he understood that it was still mostly thanks to Lee Soo-hyuk's physical strength. Suddenly turning around, they saw a strange light above them, even though they were deep underground. Lee Soo-hyuk was shocked and did not understand how this was possible, but Taejun said that he would be more surprised by anything that made sense at that moment. Realizing that everything was happening again, as in the game, including the light from above, Taejun suggested that Soo-hyuk come and stand under the light. Lee Soo-hyuk was frightened, but Taejun suggested that it had appeared for a reason. In fact, Taejun remembered that, in the game, it was a portal that transported players to the village. Both agreed to take a risk and find out what would happen next. They woke up in the same place on the cliff from which they had fallen before. They looked down the cliff and it was just a bottomless pit as before. They couldn't believe that everything they had gone through was actually happening down there. Taejun asked what Lee Soo-hyuk was going to do now and whether he was going to ask any questions, since they had already escaped from the dungeon. After thinking for a moment, Lee Soo-hyuk replied that he had already exhausted all his strength and planned to just rest today. He asked Taejun a question in return and Taejun agreed with him completely. They agreed, and Lee Soo-hyuk suggested discussing everything at their next meeting, and now really going to rest. Lee Soo-hyuk left first, expressing his hope that they would meet again soon. Thinking about Taejun's unfairness, Lee Soo-hyuk decided to call out his name. He looked back, thanked Taejun, and promised to remember his name, then continued on his way. A survey was conducted among the city's residents about what they thought of the special forces. Some responded that they thought it was cool. Some expressed the opinion that it was too much, and that people could simply go and break the law or rob the country. Others were afraid and believed that these people would turn into monsters because of such power. Shin Yunha looked at the results of the survey and was upset by the responses, even though she had expected such a reaction from people. She understood that there were many people in the world who only wanted to satisfy their greed, but on the other hand, it was a natural human desire. Despite widespread condemnation, Shin Yunha wanted to put the plan into action and destroy the monsters, but she doubted whether it was even possible to achieve this goal. And after a difficult night, Sukhyuk struggled to teach his student, explaining that he hadn't been able to sleep. He asked her not to slack off on her studies because of this and gave her an independent assignment. He himself thought about everything that had happened that night, about the swindlers, the monsters, and the dungeon from which he had miraculously escaped. He also thought about Taejun and his physical abilities, and Sukhyuk wondered if he himself was the strongest of those who also possessed power. That day, Lee Soo-hyuk was torn between his thoughts and helping his student. He wanted to meet Taejun again to find out more about the information he had. Lee Soo-hyuk decided to stop pretending to be cool and just try to gather any information he could. Instead of resting at home, Taejun played a game and examined the dungeon, which was exactly the same as in reality. In the real dungeon, there weren't even any bodies or collapsed debris, so the space looked very unreal, just like in the game. But Taejun couldn't believe that Jinho had really created all this himself. He was extremely curious about where Jinho was now. He decided to stop thinking about it and focus on what he could do. Noting that there were recovery potions and buffs in the game, Taejun wanted to see if they existed in real life. He continued to study the game diligently, defeating bosses, preparing, and developing his tactics for future battles in reality. 3 days later, Taejun came to the cliff with the desire to pass the tests again, even though there was no guarantee that he would end up in that exact place. He was tormented by doubts and considered giving up on his plan. But suddenly he heard a huge golem behind him. There was nowhere to go and no way to dodge it because the golem was standing right next to him. So Taejun jumped down. Only after jumping did Taejun realize what he had done. But there was no turning back. He just flew down. The miners' teams continued to hunt the golden golems. Now they began to use explosive devices as weapons and traps. While the golden golem was temporarily immobilized by the explosion, they captured it with a rope and knocked it to the ground. After that, one of the miners tried to finish off the golem with a hammer, while the others held it down. Once during such a hunt, things got out of control. The golem broke free and began attacking the miners. The golden golem grabbed Miner Mr. Chan by the head and lifted him up with his hand. Mr. Chan's friends tried to fight back, but they were unsuccessful. One of the miners, Chi-Yun-soo, just stood and watched the whole situation without trying to do anything with his colleagues. Alas, the golden golem was stronger and faster, and he sent Mr. Chan to the other world by crushing his head. Only then did Chi-Yun-soo lunge at the golem with a hammer. Initially, he had something bad in mind. He easily finished off the golden golem, but Mr. Cheon was already beyond saving. His body was bleeding profusely. One of his colleagues noticed that he had 3 children at home and felt very sorry for them. He said that if Chi-Yun-soo had acted faster, this would not have happened. Chi-Yun-soo couldn't explain himself, but another colleague tried to justify him by saying that he was confused and didn't have time to react. The colleague reassured them that he would call for help to take care of Mr. Cheon's body and suggested giving the reward for the golem to his family. In order not to arouse any suspicion, Chi-Yun-soo nervously agreed. Afterwards, with a dissatisfied expression on his face, he said goodbye to his colleagues and was about to leave. But after taking a few steps, he turned around and said that this was not right. His colleagues did not understand what he was talking about. Suddenly, he struck one of his colleagues hard in the face with a hammer. He suspected and shouted that they just wanted to reduce the number of mouths to feed, and that the Cheon family would not be paid anything. Chi-Yun-soo also said that they were making money through criminal means anyway, so there was no point in pretending to be kind. After that, he sat and regretted what he had done because he had once again lost his team because of himself. Every time he wanted to have a lot, but he lacked patience. Meanwhile, Taejun had already woken up in the dungeon, in the very place where he and Lee Soo-hyuk had fought the toad. Next to him was a pillar of light, as he had already passed all the tests, but he still had a long exploration of the cave ahead of him. After gathering his thoughts, Taejun set off in search of any items. It was not easy for Taejun to cope on his own, even though he had prepared well enough. 7 hours had passed since Taejun began searching the cave. During that time, he had descended 5 floors, but his strength was already running out. While descending, he had already obtained many different items. These were buffs that increased strength and agility, as well as a crystal from a certain boss, Dronzer. But Taejun couldn't answer the question of whether he had become stronger because he couldn't see his progress status as you can in the game. He also got a feather decoration that reduced the weight of his stuff by more than a third. Taejun decided to go down another floor. Shin Yoon-hee had another meeting with the authorities, who were interested in how the process was progressing. She explained that due to some personal matters, she had to postpone her reports on the proceedings. The men from the authorities told her that most of the country's residents were dissatisfied with what was happening. They threatened her again and reminded her that since she had been allowed to solve problems, she had to be more responsible. Shin Yunha understood this better than anyone else, and realized that they were just trying to pressure her while they themselves remained inactive. They forced her to act quickly and told her about recent rumors that secret agents had been sent from other countries to uncover the secret of the power. It was imperative to keep everything secret for as long as possible so that other countries could not find out anything. Remembering the stranger in the cap, Shin Yunha couldn't draw any conclusions because her conversation with him had been brief, but his style of speech and intonation were stern. She thought that he might have something to do with the Golem disaster because many people only pursue their own interests. Shin Yunha even realized that she was just like them and understood that power really shouldn't go beyond the country's borders. Taejun reached the chest in the cave from which he wanted to retrieve an item and returned to the 4th floor, but it was guarded by 2 heavy knight-type golems. The best solution for him was to avoid battle. To do this, he had prepared something in advance. Based on his past experience, Taejun knew that these golems could be destroyed if he aimed well and threw an object at their heads. He had exactly 2 iron pins left and he couldn't afford to make a mistake. He took the first pin in his hand and began to aim carefully. It was a successful throw and he managed to defeat 1 golem on the first try. All that remained was to repeat this one more time. Taejun threw the pin at the second golem. He hoped that it would all be over now, but suddenly realized that he had missed. With this throw, Taejun only enraged the golem, which quickly began to move towards him. Taejun had no choice but to run away. He knew from the game that the Night Golem's huge body was very dense. It was impossible to get rid of it with a single blow. The best solution for Taejun would be to grab the item from the chest as quickly as possible and run away. That's exactly what he did. There was only a small magic bracelet in the chest. He took it out, put it on his wrist, and then ran away. The golem caught up with Taejun too quickly, despite its huge and heavy body. Suddenly, Taejun felt very dizzy, probably from fatigue and fear. He stopped. The huge golem approached Taejun and swung his arm to deliver a powerful blow. Taejun realized that there was no way he could dodge it, so his only option was to use the power of the magic bracelet. He activated the bracelet and prayed that it would work, and it did. With the magical power of the bracelet, he destroyed the golem. Watching all this, Taejun was pleasantly shocked because he was able to defeat the golem even at the very last and most hopeless moment. Chi Yun-soo was reading the news that the price of gold had fallen because of the golden golems, but they were still paying a large sum for one. He reasoned that those who shared with their team were fools because one person could earn that kind of money. But he understood that even if that were the case, he wasn't a psychopath who would send his team to their deaths every time. He thought he could catch golems on his own. Chi Yun-soo also remembered the existence of people with special abilities such as Shin Yun-ha. He wanted to become like that so he could cope on his own. Then he could become a soldier and get a salary too. After these thoughts, he was consumed with the desire to gain power by any means necessary. In the stairwell, Chi Yun-soo met Taejun's sister and thought she was very cute. He had some very sinister thoughts. He thought that if she had relatives with abilities, he could take her hostage and find out how by threatening to harm her. In the evening, Taejun's sister was returning home from the store and wondering where Taejun was again. She wondered what he was doing. She knew that Taejun was a freelancer, but for some reason he left every day like clockwork. His sister suspected that he might be working as a miner, but she didn't want to believe it. She shook her head, concluding that her suspicions were nonsense, and went home. All this time, Chi Yun-soo was brazenly following her. He tracked her down to apartment 301 and thought she lived alone, or that no one was home. If she did live alone, it would be a great opportunity for him. In one of the cafes, a meeting took place between reporter Bon Hyung-ji and a guy named Ha Sun-oh. Ha Sun-oh was considered the first person to start spreading videos about people with superpowers. He said that people called him every day, so he simply blocked his phone. He wanted to talk to reporter Bon Hyung-ji as quickly as possible and leave. He asked what exactly the reporter wanted, even though there were no other options, as everyone wanted to get the unedited video of the fight. Bon Hyung-ji said that her company was willing to pay a decent amount of money for the full video, to which Ha Sun-oh replied that the video simply did not exist. He said he didn't have the original tape. Previously, no company had been able to buy the video because he didn't have it. Bong Hyun-ji changed her question and asked if there were other people with abilities besides Shin Yun-hee in the original footage. Ha Seong-oh replied that initially only Captain Shin Yun-hee was on the video. But Bong Hyun-ji insisted that there were definitely signs of editing in the video, and according to rumors from people who had seen the original, there was definitely another person in it. Tired, Ha Seon-oh finally admitted that the video had been edited. When he first uploaded the video, people broke into his house in less than 10 minutes. He said that they explained to him that the tape contained a secret object and that they had confiscated it. He also claimed that the original was not returned to him, and a few hours later, the edited video appeared on his account. Reporter Bon Hyung-ji was shocked by this and asked why he didn't make a backup copy right away. Ha Sung-go replied that he had, but that everything had been confiscated. They then called it a government secret. If he had kept these things, he he would have been considered a lawbreaker. After hearing all this, Bon Hengyi was incredibly upset because she had worked hard for this video, and it all turned out to be in vain. There was nothing more to talk about, so Ha Seon-oh decided to leave first and asked the reporters not to bother him anymore. But Bon Hyungji asked him to stay for a second and answer one more question. She asked him to answer honestly whether there really was no second person with abilities in the original. Ha Sung-oh replied disappointedly but confidently that there was definitely no one else. They parted ways, and on the way, Ha Sung-oh regretted that he had to lie every time, because in reality there was an even stronger guy in the video, but he couldn't do anything about it because he was forced to keep his mouth shut. Of course he would like to tell someone because such information could bring in a lot of money, but it was simply impossible. Ha Seon-oh was sad that they were still following him on the street, even though they had indeed confiscated the original video. He didn't understand why people were treating him, a law-abiding citizen, this way. Even though he had filmed something he shouldn't have, it was an accident, but people still continued to ruin his life by following him around. Suddenly, while Ha Seon-oh was in a store, he noticed Tae-jun passing by outside the window. It was a shock to him because he never expected to meet him, but now he realized that it was definitely him, because he remembered his face well from the video. Tae-jun had no strength left, but he was happy that he had gotten what he wanted. He considered the wind bracelet to be his best achievement in recent times. The bracelet could protect its owner with a shield of wind from enemy attacks. In the game, it took 10 minutes to recharge the bracelet, which seemed like an eternity, but in reality, the bracelet was a very useful item. Tae-jun was very happy that the bracelet was useful because, without it, he would not have been able to defeat that golem. He walked and thought that if a dangerous situation arose, he would be able to take certain measures. Meanwhile, Ha Sun-oh decided to follow him. Ha Seon-oh confirmed to himself that Tae-jun was definitely the person he saw in the video, and he wanted to film Tae-jun again. He had already come up with a plan and wanted to escape surveillance in order to carry it out and earn a large sum of money. Smiling, Ha Seon-oh concluded that there were no hopeless situations and continued to follow Tae-jun. Ha Seon-go seriously set himself the goal of taking a couple of pictures of Tae-jun while following him in order to get rich, and carefully followed him. First, he had to get rid of the people walking behind him by waiting for them to pass. He thought that the special services must also know Tae-jun if he was in that video and they removed him from it. Based on this, he suspected that Tae-jun might simply be under surveillance and that they were trying to hide him from people. Shin Yun-ha submitted a report on the current month's surveillance to the commander of the defense capital. He noticed that Shin Yun-ha was again recording everything in detail by the hour, just like last month. She explained that she had taken on this responsibility because she herself wanted to observe this special guy, that is, Tae-jun. Shin Yun-ha claimed that she had seen everything she recorded with her own eyes and that the information was completely accurate. At the same time, she crossed her fingers behind her back. But the commander expressed his trust in Shin Yun-ha and confirmed that if she said so, then it must be true. He said that many people were suspicious of the attempts to hide Tae-jun's identity in the reports, and since Shin Yun-ha, who was observing, also concealed her identity, many people questioned the authenticity of the reports. The commander hoped that Shin Yun-ha would be able to handle everything and not create a dangerous situation for him and the people. She thought about how she had tried from the very beginning to make sure that no one noticed Tae-jun, but unfortunately, this plan had failed. Therefore, Shin Yun-ha tried to simply apologize to the commander for putting him in an awkward position, but he was kind to her. He asked her not to worry and to just keep going, hoping that nothing would happen. He trusted her because she was his niece. The commander also inquired about the status of the volunteer candidate selection process. Shin Yun-ha said that she had already decided on the final candidates, and all that remained was to conduct interviews. She thought it would be best to select the strongest people, and the interviews would focus on their greed. Afterwards, she met with Tae-jun and told him about her intentions. At first, he did not understand what she meant by identifying the candidate's greed. She explained that she wanted to find out how greedy each person was. Now it was impossible to entrust this work only to those who wanted to ensure the safety of the country's inhabitants. It would be better to trust those who revealed their greed. She believed that such people could be more useful, provided that their greed did not harm others or interfere with the mission. Tae-jun doubted that there would be many people willing to openly declare their desires, but he agreed that it was a good idea. But he did not understand and asked what the point was in her telling him all this, and whether she wanted to see his greed. Shin Yun-ha replied that she considered Tae-jun her scout, and that he did not have to prove his qualifications. She just wanted to hear his answer. On the appointed day, Shin Yun-ha was unable to come for the answer, so she asked again if Tae-jun wanted to join the squad. Before giving his final answer, Tae-jun asked if he would receive a salary when he became a soldier. Shin Yun-ha explained that after completing a short training course, he would be appointed to the temporary position of junior sergeant and would be paid a salary. This salary was very small compared to the amounts he could earn from hunting. The money Tae-jun had already saved was enough to live on until old age. If he agreed, it would be easier to put on a show in front of his sister because he would not be able to hide his power forever. After thinking about it a little more, Tae-jun accepted Shin Yun-he's offer, but on the condition that he would not share any knowledge. She agreed and was extremely pleased with his decision, as a great deal could depend on Tae-jun. And Taejun came to the amusing realization that Shin Yunha was now his boss, and he had to speak to her politely. Chi Yoon-soo sat in his room watching various adult videos with the volume turned up almost to the maximum. Laughing nervously, he asked himself if this was love. Taejun warned Shin Yunha that he would have to refuse if he had to reveal his identity when joining the squad. Shin Yunho had taken care of this earlier and said that soldiers would be allowed to wear masks and not disclose their personal information. This could attract even more attention from people, as Taejun thought, but he had no choice since he wanted to hide his face. When he got home, Taejun rested with his sister, but he couldn't stop thinking about everything that was coming. Besides, he knew he had to tell his sister about joining the unit, but he couldn't predict her reaction in advance and was afraid that there might be complications with her since he had already joined. He sat and thought about how to start this conversation, but his sister broke the silence when she remembered something. She told Taejun that she was going to the supermarket because it was discount day. Taejun suggested going with her if she was going to buy a lot, but she advised him to stay home and rest, saying that the store offered delivery. Explaining that it was a waste of money to pay for delivery and that it could be dangerous outside, Taejun insisted on going with his sister. As they left the house, Chi Yoon-soo watched them surreptitiously. On the way, Taejun looked at his sister and realized how much she had grown. There was a 10-year age difference between them, and he remembered how just a few years ago she was little and begged him for cookies. Seeing how much his sister had grown, Taejun began to understand the feelings of fathers looking at their daughters. His sister walked around looking back and paying attention to the suspended construction sites. She asked Taejun if he was still working on the construction site. He tried to act surprised and asked where else he could earn money if not there. But his sister explained that construction projects had been frozen everywhere lately, and Taejun continued to work himself to exhaustion every day, which seemed rather strange. Realizing that his sister probably knew everything, Taejun became nervous because he thought everything was going according to plan. He understood that there was nowhere to go and that it was worth telling everything honestly. Suddenly, loudspeakers urgently warned residents about monsters that had broken through the defenses. Everyone was urged to refrain from going outside until the danger had been eliminated and to find the nearest shelter. There was no time for conversation and they had to hide as quickly as possible. Taejun and his sister agreed to discuss everything at home. Suddenly, they heard strange sounds and turned to see a stone golem in front of them. The golem almost grabbed Taejun's sister, but he reacted quickly and struck it with his powerful arm, destroying the golem. That's how he gave himself away in front of his sister without even explaining anything to her. When he got home, Taejun prepared himself for a tense conversation with his sister. She began to question him about how he got that arm. She also asked if he was the second person with the ability from the rumors and if he had lied to her about his work. Taejun even broke out in a slight sweat from her questions, but he began to make excuses. He said that he really did work on a construction site, even though there was less work. He explained that if he joined the squad, he would receive a steady salary, so he applied and got the hand at the same time. He mixed truth and lies. He nervously justified himself to his sister, saying that the successful candidates had already been selected, even though there had been no official announcement yet. His sister was furious that Taejun had decided everything on his own without consulting her. She accused him of not considering her feelings and opinion at all. Attempts to calm his sister down were initially futile as she screamed about her unwillingness for Taejun to do anything dangerous. Since his sister was afraid that something might happen to him and she would be left all alone, she asked him not to get involved in dangerous situations. Taejun was tired of listening to all this and tried to calm his sister down as quickly as possible. He explained that she shouldn't worry and that everything would be fine with him. He explained that there would be other people with him in the unit and support from the army, so this job was quite safe and acceptable. He promised his sister that he would be fine and that he would survive. Ta decided to accept this and trust Taejun. It turns out that Chi Yoon-soo saw Taejun defeat the golem in front of his sister, and he couldn't help but rejoice at his excellent intuition. At that time, Chi Yoon-soo followed Taejun to send him to the other world because he thought Taejun was this girl's boyfriend, but he witnessed the manifestation of his power. He never strayed from his plan to use Taejun's sister to gain the same power. Chi Yoon-soo's happiness knew no bounds, and he was already imagining in his head everything he intended to do. Ha Seon-oh decided to arrange another meeting with Bong Hyung-ji at the same cafe. When Bong Hyun-ji arrived, she wondered why he had called her with a strange message when he had asked her not to contact him anymore last time. They were being watched, and Ha Seon-oh knew it, so he said it would be quite difficult to discuss anything. Ha Seon-oh had a request for Bong Hyun-ji related to the owner of the power, that is, Taejun. He gave Bong Hyun-ji Taejun's address so that she could wait in her car outside his house. Bong Hyun-ji was surprised by people's determination because even under constant surveillance, he was able to obtain such information. Thinking that everything would be done fairly quickly, Bong Hyun-ji simply sat in the car and waited for Taejun to come out. But that was not the case because even after 5 days of continuous surveillance, Taejun simply did not appear outside his house. She was shocked that in almost a week, Taejun hadn't even come out to take out the trash. And considering his strength, he should have been hunting monsters or at least going out for a walk. Bong Hyung-ji was tired of sitting in the car for so long. Chi Yoon-soo was also watching Taejun in the stairwell, and he was getting nervous because Taejun hadn't come out even once. He considered him a reclusive nerd and couldn't do anything but wait for him to come out. Chi Yun-soo also noticed how Tae-jun, pretending to be going down the stairs, checked everyone who left and entered the building. It infuriated him that Tae-jun was just lying around at home on the couch, or as he thought, having fun with a girl, while he himself had to suffer in the stairwell for days on end. Although Bon Hyung-ji and Chi Yun-soo did not know about each other, they reassured themselves that Tae-jun would eventually come out. In recent days, Tae-jun had been sitting at home playing games to better study the amplifiers in the mines so that he could soon return to a real mine. He left all the housework to his sister these days and hung out in the game under the pretext of not having a job. Tae-jun remembered how a few days ago he had used his power in public, including in front of his sister. He understood that he couldn't expose himself like that anymore. He decided to stay home for a while to hide, but that made him very bored. Suddenly, someone rang Tae-jun's doorbell, but when he went out, there was no one there. He noticed a letter on the floor and, intrigued, decided to read it. In the letter, the unknown people wrote that they knew about Tae-jun's powers and had proof. They blackmailed him, saying that the whole world would find out about him if he didn't come to the station by the third exit before midnight. His sister suspected something strange and asked Tae-jun about the letter, but he replied that it was just an advertisement. He made up an excuse for his sister that he was going to the store to buy cookies so that he could go to the meeting himself. When Tae-jun left the house, Chi Yun-soo and Bon Hyung-ji were overjoyed because they had finally waited for him. Bon Hyung-ji continued to watch him and had already prepared her camera to take pictures. She followed Tae-jun to finally find out what powers he had and how he got them. Meanwhile, Chi Yun-soo had already made it to the apartment to carry out his sinister plan. He already knew the password 301 because he had previously watched Tae-jun's sister enter those numbers. Dae-jun's sister heard the sound of the door opening and thought that he had forgotten something and had returned. But when she stepped out into the hallway, she saw only Chi Yun-soo, a man she didn't know, and was terrified. Chi Yun-soo grabbed the girl with a malicious grin and threw her to the floor, covering her mouth with his hand. He behaved like a maniac, laughing at the girl's attempts to escape his strong arms and telling her not to resist. He said that she wouldn't be able to delay things because he had sent Tae-jun far away, and he wouldn't return until they had some fun. The rude Chi Yun-soo forced Tae-jun's sister to just give up and claimed that she would like it. Suddenly, he heard the sound of a door unlocking and, frightened for himself, stopped what he was doing but continued to hold the girl. While Bong Hyun-ji waited for Tae-jun to move away a little, she glanced at his window on the third floor and noticed Chi Yun-soo's silhouette there. She couldn't just ignore it because she had seen Chi Yun-soo running around the stairs above the third floor for 5 days. As soon as Tae-jun left his house, Chi Yun-soo immediately came downstairs, which was extremely suspicious. Bon Hyung-ji got goosebumps, but she didn't know what to do except gather evidence. She changed her mind and decided to catch up with Tae-jun and tell him everything she had seen because her conscience was tormenting her. Tae-jun returned home and, seeing everything that was happening on the floor of his apartment, became enraged as never before. He looked at Chi Yun-soo with the most burning and cruel gaze in the world. Before Chi Yun-soo could say a word, Tae-jun punched him in the chin and pushed him away from his sister. With another powerful blow, he knocked Chi Yun-soo onto a wooden table, completely unable to control his actions. Chi Yun-soo tried to get up and attack him with insults, but Tae-jun instantly threw him back down again and he fell, curled up in pain. Chi Yun-soo barely managed to gather his strength, got up, grabbed a wooden stick from the table, and tried to strike Tae-jun in the back of the head. Tae-jun was ready for this and, at the right moment, used a windshield to block the blow, leaving Chi Yun-soo confused. He grabbed Chi Yun-soo by the collar again and threw him into his room with all his might so that his sister wouldn't see what was happening. Tae-jun locked the door and prepared to take revenge on the scoundrel Chi Yun-soo. He lunged at him with his fist and started fighting and punching him right in the face, not giving him a second to explain. Chi Yun-soo shouted something incomprehensible, trying to stop him and justify himself, but Tae-jun didn't care anymore. He just kept hitting him and even knocked out a couple of his teeth despite Chi Yun-soo's pleas to stop. Tae-jun finally stopped hitting him but continued to stare at him with wild eyes. Chi Yun-soo justified himself by saying that he hadn't actually done anything. Despite what had happened, Chi Yun-soo even began to tease Tae-jun, saying that he knew who he really was. He assumed that Tae-jun didn't want everyone to find out about it, so he fell for the fake note. So he began to propose that they part ways amicably and he would turn a blind eye to Tae-jun beating him up. Before he could finish, Tae-jun interrupted and said he didn't understand why he kept asking to be let go. He asked Chi Yun-soo why he thought he was going to let him live. Chi Yun-soo's eyes filled with terrible fear, and Tae-jun continued to say that he would never forgive the scoundrels who had dared to hurt his family. Chi Yun-soo grimaced in uncertainty and horror, and almost cried because everything was going completely differently than planned. Transforming his hand into a powerful golem, Tae-jun decided to finish off Chi-yun with it, but suddenly froze. At that moment, he heard the sound of police sirens and the shouts of police officers running towards the house. Tae-jun realized that Bong Hyun-ji had decided to call the police for some reason, and was angry that he couldn't fully take revenge on Chi Yun-soo. He threw Chi Yun-soo away from him, and Chi Yun-soo instantly broke free and ran towards the window. Chi Yun-soo, desperate and afraid for his freedom and his life, quickly opened the window and jumped out of it from the third floor. But in that moment, he didn't even think about the fact that this could only make the situation worse. After a while, Bong Hyun-ji was sitting in a cafe working on her laptop and realized that she had not been able to obtain any information. She missed her chance to get real evidence because she couldn't let anyone get hurt in this terrible situation. Although her thoughts diverged because she didn't understand whether it was worth worrying about others in such difficult times. She thought about Chi-Yoon-soo, who, fortunately or unfortunately, had jumped from the 3rd floor and gotten away with only a broken leg and bruises on his face. When he was taken away in an ambulance, Bong Hyun-ji asked him if he was going to take revenge or press charges against Tae-jun. He replied that there was no question of revenge because he hadn't even thought about it, and that was quite strange. Assessing the situation, Bong Hyun-ji concluded that everything had ended well, but she still felt uneasy. Tae-jun left the police station and Shin A-rim was waiting for him on the street. She greeted him, introduced herself as Shin Yoon-hee's sister, and asked his name. Shin A-rim came instead of Shin Yoon-hee, so as not to attract unnecessary attention, and decided to talk to Tae-jun and drive him home at the same time. She told Tae-jun that she was one of the few people who had seen the original video of the battle with the giant golem. After seeing the video, Shin A-rim became interested in Tae-jun's talent and had long wanted to meet him because she was studying golems. Tae-jun immediately guessed that since Shin A-rim was a researcher, she was the one who had previously helped Shin Yoon-hae obtain the golem's hand. She confirmed his thoughts but wondered how Tae-jun had found out about it before them, to which he did not respond. When they arrived at Tae-jun's house, Shin A-rim suggested that he visit the laboratory sometime so she could share the information she had learned there with him. Tae-jun replied that he would think about it so as not to appear that he didn't need it and that he already knew everything better than anyone else. That evening at the lab, Shin Yoon-ha asked Shin A-rim how her ride with Tae-jun had gone. Shin A-rim said that she had driven him home and had not persuaded him to visit the laboratory because she wanted him to spend more time with his sister. She asked Shin Yoon-ha what had happened to the criminal Chi-Yoon-soo. Shin Yoon-ha didn't know all the details, but assumed that he was in the hospital. Shin A-rim was outraged by this because he would be kept there until he fully recovered. She said it would be better if he went to the other world right away. She even expressed regret that this had not happened. Shin Yoon-ha agreed with her, even though it was cruel. Late at night, Tae-jun went outside and Shin Yoon-ha was waiting for him under the house. She asked where he was going so late and he was surprised to see her there. Shin Yoon-ha guessed and asked if he had decided to visit Chi-Yoon-soo in the hospital. Tae-jun replied that it was none of her business. But since Shin Yoon-ha was used to his rudeness, she continued the conversation. She was able to stop Tae-jun with a question about whether he regretted that Chi-Young-soo had not died in the fall, and she realized that this was indeed the case. Even though Shin Yoon-ha understood his feelings, she warned Tae-jun that, unfortunately, he had already missed his chance to send Chi-Yoon-soo to the other world. She said that trying to do anything to him now would be a foolish decision. Tae-jun was angry at Shin Yoon-ha's words and grabbed her by the collar. He shouted that she couldn't possibly understand how he felt, and told her to get lost if she was going to get in his way. Shin Yoon-hee was indignant, and confirmed that she couldn't know everything he was feeling because she hadn't seen anything. But she had to warn him. If something happened to Chi-Yoon-soo after what had happened, the police would come for Tae-jun first. She explained that in that case, Tae-jun would either end up behind bars or have to live the rest of his life in the shadows. But he didn't listen to her and shouted that he didn't care about any of that, and that he wasn't doing it for himself. After that, Shin Yoon-ha pointed out that this was precisely why he was acting foolishly. She asked him to listen to her. She said that if he harmed Chi-Yoon-soo, it would no longer be considered self-defense, and he would have to pay for his actions for the rest of his life. Shin Yoon-ha also touched on the most important thing for Tae-jun, which was that he would have to leave his sister. She advised him to think carefully once again. She suggested that he imagine two scenarios in his head. Would his sister want mindless revenge or her own brother? After Shin Yoon-ha's words, Tae-jun immediately changed his mind and returned home after going to the store. At home, when his sister asked him where he had gone, he handed her a bag of ice cream from the store. His sister was very happy and noted that she had been craving something sweet. Tae-jun stood there thinking about something, but his silence was interrupted by his sister, who handed him a pack of ice cream and suggested he eat it right away. She gave him melon ice cream, which upset him because he liked honey, but his sister jokingly shut him up, saying that she wanted that too. He thought again, noticing that Yeon-hee was acting as if nothing had happened. Looking at her, Tae-jun understood that she was also afraid to show how much she was hurting, so that Tae-jun wouldn't lose his temper and do something to Chi-Yoon-soo. He understood that Shin Yoon-ha was right and that Yeon-hee really needed him, but his anger was too difficult to quell. Even though Tae-jun knew that Chi-Yoon-soo would be convicted by law, he was very hurt by what he and his sister had to go through. He couldn't understand why everything was happening this way, and his anger and helplessness were no different from the feelings he had before. Tae-jun remembered the times before his life was divided into before and after, and the day when he cursed everything and everyone, which made him feel very uncomfortable. He also remembered Shin Yoon-hee's words that the survivors must take responsibility, but that was beyond human capacity. The miners encountered the steel dog with the crystal, and planned to destroy it in order to obtain the coveted crystal. One of them remembered that the news had warned to be wary of golems that were different from the rest. His colleague laughed and suggested that the government was deliberately deceiving people in order to take all the stones for themselves. He insisted on this and did not want to miss this chance, even if fighting the steel dog would be difficult. His partner finally changed his mind, and the two of them set out to do the job. The miners managed to defeat the dog and get a huge red crystal, but immediately after that there was a loud explosion. A giant earth dragon appeared before them, the likes of which had never been seen before. During their meeting, Shin Yun-ha and Shin A-rim discussed Chi Yun-soo, and Shin A-rim suggested that he would spend his entire life in prison. Shin Yun-ha replied that this would be good as the country's punishments are quite lenient, and asked why the sentence might be so long. Shin A-rim explained that suspicious items had been found during a search of Chi Yun-soo's house. In addition to the attempted rape, he was suspected of killing 7 people. Shin Yun-ha was horrified by what she heard, but both of them were glad that Chi Yun-soo was unlikely to reappear in society. Shin Yun-ha's phone rang, and she was urgently called to work. She was informed that another incredibly huge monster had appeared, and that action had to be taken quickly. The news reported that the new monster was twice the size of the largest monster, and that special forces had been sent to fight it. Taejun watched the news and was shocked by the appearance of the Earth Dragon. In the game, it was an optional hidden boss for obtaining trophies, and it was hiding not in the mines but on the game maps. It was necessary to evacuate the city, but Taejun was terribly curious about who had pulled out the crystal and contributed to the appearance of the Earth Dragon. He remembered how the news told people who didn't know the rules of the game not to touch the strange golems. For some reason, Taejun was sure that the people who did this knew about this request, but went ahead with it for their own benefit. The television broadcast urgent news that Captain Shin Yun-ha had arrived at the scene. Seeing this, Taejun remembered her words about responsibility and simply turned off the TV so he could leave with Yeon-hee as soon as possible. She had asked him to devote more time and attention to Yeon-hee, so he decided to do just that, instead of rushing to help in the battle. The military saw that the Earth Dragon had the ability to regenerate. This was something no one could have imagined before. Shin Yun-hae reported that it was regenerating in a second, despite dozens of injuries from artillery and firearms. She was terrified by what was happening, and did not know how to deal with it all if military weapons did not help. There were only 2 lines of defense left, and it was a critical situation. After considering the situation, Shin Yun-ha ordered all units to assemble and open fire on the monster together. Suddenly, other soldiers burst into the office and reported that a civilian was fighting the monster in the 3rd line area. Shin Yun-ha was very surprised by this, but immediately thought of Taejun, even though she had asked him to look after Yeon-hee. It was a guy in disguise who was trying to fight the dragon, attacking him with gusts of wind from its mouth. Despite all the guy's actions and attempts to damage the dragon, it still regenerated instantly. Although he was able to dodge perfectly, he was fed up with the dragon simply regenerating. Shin Yun-ha arrived at the guy's location and asked him why he was doing this if he really wanted to hide his identity. He justified himself by saying that he was undercover, but Shin Yun-ha admitted that the wig and glasses he was wearing did not change the situation much. Their conversation was interrupted for a few seconds by the dragon flying between them, but luckily they managed to dodge it. The guy asked why Shin Yun-ha wasn't working, and she replied that the 2 of them needed to come up with a plan urgently to save everyone's lives. They continued their conversation while trying to dodge the dragon's attacks, and the guy asked if she already had a plan. Shin Yun-ha suggested that they start fighting the monster together to find at least some of its weak points. She said it was worth trying to cut the dragon, but the guy admitted that he had already tried, and it was unsuccessful. She was surprised that he had managed to do that, but she didn't ask any questions, because they needed to come up with another plan as soon as possible. They ran away from the dragon chasing them, and the guy warned that they had to stop running, or they would reach the 1st line of defense. But Shin Yun-ha said that they had already tried all the options and that she couldn't just run away like that. He replied that in that case, they had to do something immediately and not lead the monster to the troops. They stopped and, barely able to stand, tried to hold the dragon's huge mouth shut with their bare hands. According to Shin Yun-ha, the best option at that moment was to cut the dragon so that it could not recover. It was the only option that came to her mind, so they immediately set to work. They smashed the monster into thousands of small pieces in the hope that everything would work out, and the flying debris even destroyed buildings around them. Together, they completely destroyed the monster and, hoping that everything had worked out, stood there resting and trying to think through everything that had happened. But that was not the case. In a matter of seconds, the stones began to spin and attract each other, completely restoring the dragon. The restored dragon began to attack the guy and Shin Yun-ha, and they panicked, not knowing what to do. Shin Yun-ha understood that they had done everything possible at that moment, and asked the guy to just leave, while she planned to stay and continue trying to do something. The guy was disappointed that the military still hadn't come up with anything to destroy the monster and was about to leave, dodging attacks as he went. But first, he asked Shin Yun-ha if she knew where Taejun was, because he might know what to do. But Shin Yun-ha explained that it was impossible to contact him because all communications had been cut off again after the disaster was reported. Besides, she knew that Taejun would not come because she herself had asked him to stay with Yeon-hee, which she regretted at that moment. At that time, Taejun, Yeon-hee, and other residents were sitting in a shelter. Taejun couldn't collect his thoughts. He overheard the men talking, and one of them wondered how long they would have to stay there and why people still couldn't destroy the monster. Taejun knew that because of the Earth Dragon's regenerative abilities, it would be impossible to defeat it without knowing the exact tactics, and it was practically impossible to figure out the right strategy during a feudal battle with it. He looked at the sleeping Yahello and realized that he was pretending to be uninvolved in all the events only for his sister's sake. And because of this, he felt like he was missing out on something truly important. He decided to distract himself from his thoughts and went to get a can of soda from the vending machine when he suddenly heard someone address him. It was Jin Yang's voice, who was surprised and delighted to meet Tae-jun. He said with surprise that he did not expect to meet Tae-jun in the shelter because he thought that Tae-jun should be fighting monsters due to his powers. Tae-jun explained that he did not engage in battles from which he could not benefit. He asked Jin Yang if he would fight for nothing. Hearing Jin Yang's affirmative answer, Tae-jun almost choked. He was surprised and asked if his answer was serious. Jin Yang confirmed this and said that his brother was very ill. Jin Yang admitted that this was why he went to the mines. On that day, his brother could not evacuate with everyone else because he was still in the hospital. He was afraid that monsters might attack the hospital where his brother was staying. Therefore, Jin Yang also wanted to have the strength to fight them. The only way to protect his brother and help him was to destroy all the monsters. Jin Yang dreamed of this. After hearing his words, Tae-jun realized that only he could resolve this situation in battle, and he would do it not for the sake of the people. He had his own reason to fight and act, and that was his sister Yeon-hee. He understood that for Yeon-hee's sake, he was willing and ready to go into battle 10,000 times. The boy and Shin Yoon-ha hid behind buildings from the monster to catch their breath. They no longer knew what to do because the dragon was recovering too quickly, but they still tried not to lose hope in the existing method. Suddenly, they heard Tae-jun's voice approaching them from behind. His arrival was too unexpected, especially for Shin Yoon-ha. Tae-jun overheard their conversation and confirmed that such a method existed and that it was not very complicated. Yeon-hee woke up in the shelter and called out to Tae-jun, but Jin Yang answered her. He informed Yeon-hee that Tae-jun had left for a short while. Yeon-hee became alert and frightened. Jin Yang asked her not to be afraid and not to worry, explaining that he knew Tae-jun and that Tae-jun had asked him to look after her. Because of everything that had happened, Yeon-hee had lost her trust in people, so she couldn't just take his word for it. As proof, Jin Yang showed her a couple of photos and she asked where they had met. He became nervous because he couldn't tell her the whole truth about his attempts to fight monsters, so he had to lie and say that they were colleagues. Yeon-hee was worried because she didn't know where Tae-jun had gone, but Jin Yang tried to calm her down, saying that he had promised to return soon. At the scene, Shin Yoon-ha asked why Tae-jun had decided to show up, and he replied that it was obvious. They almost got into a fight, but their argument was interrupted by a guy who asked Tae-jun if he knew what to do and how to defeat the monster. The guy told them about rumors that someone had pulled a red crystal out of the monster, but he didn't know what had happened to it after that. Tae-jun remembered that despite everything, the bosses were not particularly difficult opponents. One just had to be able to think. The monster's real body was a small bug inside a red gemstone, and it had to be somewhere near the dragon. Thinking that the miners who had summoned the dragon were unlikely to have escaped and ran to the mine exit, he asked Shin Yoon-ho and Lee Soo-hyuk for something. He said that they only needed to delay the Earth Dragon for 10 minutes, and he would take care of everything. Shin Yoon-ha did not understand this plan of action and why they had to just wait instead of fighting. Lee Soo-hyuk asked if he was sure he could destroy the dragon in that amount of time. Tae-jun was absolutely sure of this and wasted no time in going to look for the miners. Previously, Lee Soo-hyuk and Shin Yoon-ha had expressed their confidence in his abilities and supported Tae-jun. The miners were carrying a huge crystal, and one of them wondered if they could really escape so easily. But his colleague saw no problem in escaping despite the appearance of the monster precisely because of their actions. He said that nothing could be done about it, so the best solution would be to get away from the scene as quickly as possible. Tae-jun found them, overheard their conversation, and spoke to them, but they were frightened and thought that everything was lost. He asked them not to worry because he was not a soldier or a police officer, and asked them to simply give him the crystal. As Tae-jun expected, the miners refused to do so and shouted that they had found the crystal. He laughed and said that they had broken in illegally and explained that he didn't need the money. The miners thought he was talking nonsense, but despite this, Tae-jun decided to explain the whole situation. He asked them to look closely at the crystal to see that there was an insect inside, which was the real body of the dragon. One miner didn't believe him, and the other asked if Tae-jun could destroy the insect and give them the crystal fragments. But Tae-jun replied that this was impossible because the crystal was also part of the dragon's body and would disappear along with it. It was expected that the miners would deny everything and refuse to comply with Tae-jun's request. He thought that the miners would be selfish, so he decided not to continue the conversation with them and immediately resorted to extreme measures. Tae-jun used his powers to suddenly attack the miner and knock him to the ground. He told the second miner that he didn't care about their opinion anyway. Initially, he just wanted to see how they would react to a calm request, but everything happened exactly as expected. The frightened miner asked him not to go too far and suggested simply sharing the profits from the crystal. He begged Tae-jun not to harm them because they were also in a difficult situation, without work and without hope. The miner shouted that without money, their families would have to live on the streets, but Tae-jun did not continue to listen to him and punched him in the face. He knocked him to the ground too and shouted that he didn't care about their problems at all, and then proceeded to finish what he had started. Both Suk-hook and Shin Yoon-ha tried with all their might to hold back the dragon, and the 10 minutes Tae-jun had given them seemed like an eternity. Suddenly, they saw the dragon's body begin to straighten up, and something strange was happening. The Earth Dragon emitted a bright white light and slowly dissolved into thin air. In a matter of seconds, the dragon disappeared completely, which was a huge shock to Shin Yun-ha and Lee Soo-hyuk. Shin Yun-hee couldn't believe that Taejun was capable of such a thing, but she considered what was happening to be unbelievable. Lee Soo-hyuk, on the other hand, froze in bewilderment. He understood that Taejun was definitely connected to Shadow of Dungeon in some way, since he had also acted confidently in the caves. Some time passed and several more different types of monsters appeared. Huge, stronger, and more vicious golems. One rainy day, Lee Soo-hyuk went hunting for them, even though it was no longer as easy as before. Despite the power of the new golems, he was still able to defeat one with confidence once again, but it took all his strength. On his way home, he noticed a poster for a long-past festival with fireworks on Namsan. Looking at this poster, Soo-hyuk remembered something that had happened earlier with great sadness. Back when he was just a simple boy and everyone lived a normal life, he had also noticed this bright sign. That same day, he told his girlfriend Sun-hai about it and suggested they go together. She immediately refused because she was busy with her studies, but Lee Soo-hyuk tried to persuade her. Although Lee Soo-hyuk respected Sun-hee's opinion, he still really wanted to go to the festival with her, as his other friends had also refused. You could see the deep sadness in his eyes at her refusal, and he had no hope left. Seeing the expression on Lee Soo-hyuk's face, Sun-hee agreed and promised to try to reschedule her lessons so she could go to the festival. Sin-hee herself was preparing to confess something to Soo-hyuk and felt that he was going through the same thing, so she agreed. On the day of the fireworks festival, they met at a cafe with a wonderful view from the windows. Lee Soo-hyuk was extremely pleased to see her and said that he had specifically chosen such a cozy place from which the fireworks would be clearly visible. While everything was going well, Lee Soo-hyuk decided not to miss the moment and give Sin-hee a gift, but when he reached into his pocket, he found nothing there. Seeing that Soo-hyuk had suddenly panicked, Sin-hee asked him what he was looking for. He replied that everything was fine, but in reality he was very worried because the gift was very expensive. Sin-hee decided not to dwell on it and changed the subject. She recalled the past and said that they had grown up again. She remembered how Lee Soo-hyuk used to be the terror of all the boys, always able to stand up for himself, and then he started studying hard and even graduated from college with honors. He was embarrassed by her stories, but Sin-hee continued to reminisce about their school days and even Lee Soo-hyuk's anger from his past complexes. She said that in 6th grade she had to go through a lot of trouble with Lee Soo-hyuk. These memories made Soo-hyuk wonder why she had cared so much about him before. Sin-hee replied that they had not communicated until 6th grade because there were many negative rumors about him. But then she just wanted to check if all those rumors were true, so she became friends with Soo-hyuk. Sin-hee was very happy that he was interested in such moments from the past. She remembered that Lee Soo-hyuk wanted to tell her something at the meeting, so she asked him not to delay and to do it right away. Lee Soo-hyuk was confused because he felt awkward admitting it right away, and he had lost the gift somewhere. But Sin-hee understood everything anyway and tried to get the cherished words out of him as quickly as possible in such a lovely and beautiful setting. Dozens of colorful fireworks were already shining outside the window, and Sin-hee admitted that she was there for the same reason as Lee Soo-hyuk. She asked Lee Soo-hyuk to be more direct and immediately confessed her love to him. He froze with awkwardness and excitement, and Sin-hee continued that she had loved him since they met in 1st grade 13 years ago. Sung-hee said that she couldn't keep it to herself anymore and had been waiting a long time for Lee Soo-hyuk to confess his feelings. She became embarrassed and didn't know what to say, but Lee Soo-hyuk quickly took matters into his own hands and leaned towards Sun-hee's face. Their passionate first kiss against the backdrop of colorful fireworks said it all. They left the cafe holding hands, and Lee Soo-hyuk shyly asked if they were dating now. With great joy, Sin-hee replied that after the date and the kiss, the answer was definitely yes. Since everything was going so well, Lee Soo-hyuk suggested that Sin-hee come to his place for the night. But Sin-hee's answer was interrupted by a sudden phone call that she had to answer. Jin-ho called her with an urgent request, and she promised to take care of everything soon. Soo-hyuk got scared and asked who had called her. Sun-hee replied that it was Jin-ho, the CEO of the game company where she worked. He asked what game they were developing, and Sina simply showed him pictures of the characters from the game Golem. She explained that at first she wanted to earn some extra money, but then she grew to enjoy it. Soo-hyuk was upset that she had to work so late. He suggested that they just go home together, but Sin-hee refused because their company was nearby and she needed to go there. Sung-hee agreed to let him walk her to the company and asked if she had mentioned her job earlier. On the way, Lee Soo-hyuk dared to tell her that he had called her to confess his love and had bought her a luxurious and expensive necklace as a gift. Upon hearing the price, Sun-hee became enraged and requested that he urgently find the lost necklace and give it to her as soon as possible. She promised that she would finish her work quickly and return home if he found the necklace. They joked with each other and went their separate ways, looking forward to seeing each other again soon. Soo-hyuk remembered that day in almost every detail, but the night he was supposed to come to Sin-hee never came. The day after the incident, Mount Namsan simply disappeared, and Lee Suk-hyuk never saw Sun-hee again. He hid his tears in the rain and was consumed with the desire to find the company, or at least Jin-ho, in order to find his beloved Sin-hee. The miners fought large monsters that looked like stoneflies, and one of them suggested giving up and reporting them to the unit. Another miner reminded them why they were there and said that if they defeated the monsters themselves, the whole country would be proud of them. The miners had a very difficult time fighting the monsters because they had nothing but their usual weapons. Suddenly, a military unit burst onto the scene and immediately began to fight back against the monsters. This made the miners very angry because they realized that now they would not only lose their profits, but also face punishment. The soldiers, including Taejun, wore masks and skillfully destroyed each monster with their powerful fist. When all the monsters had been defeated, they began to deal with the miners' activities. Sergeant So Ji-yeon reported that no golems had been detected within a radius of 100 meters. Captain Shin Yoon-ha asked the miners if they were all right and if anyone had been injured, but then she informed them that they were suspected of illegal entry into the territory and combat operation. The miners protested, saying that their team also wanted to fight legally, but they were not accepted into the special forces. They said that if they were simply taken and arrested, it could be seen as an attempt by the military to eliminate their competitors. Shin Yoon-ha accused them of breaking the law anyway and that they could accidentally end up dead. The miner argued that they were just making a living this way and weren't doing anything to spite the state or the people. Surprised by their words, Shin Yoon-ha explained that they did not understand what they were getting themselves into and only wanted to get paid for it. She said that most of the soldiers were killed and often there was no way to help them because others were fighting the golem. She tried to prove that they were not in a game and that the golems were not game mobs but real monsters. Sergeant Kang Woo-ho looked at Shin Yoon-ha and said that she was acting as usual. Taejun took the pseudonym Kim Cheol-soo for his service. He heard Shin Yoon-hee's conversation and understood that everything was actually like in the game. Sergeant Bak Min-woo praised his colleagues for their good work that day. He suggested organizing a dinner for everyone to celebrate the successful completion of the job. Many liked the idea, but Taejun did not appreciate the offer as he just wanted to rest after work. When his colleagues tried to persuade him, he replied that there was no reason to party. Pak Min-woo said that it was not only a party, but also a good chance for colleagues to find common ground with each other. Sergeant Dong Wook-moon noted that there was no point in talking to Taejun because, despite dozens of attempts, he still did not want to engage. He said that Taejun seemed to want to stand out on purpose, but Taejun noticed that he himself probably wanted that because he judged him that way every time. Kim Chol-soo asked Dong-wook how many times Sergeant Yusol had taken on the golem that he couldn't handle. Dong-wook-moon immediately objected, but he couldn't even answer Taejun's question about what his tactics were for fighting monsters. Taejun understood that he had not even studied tactics and could not name a single term. Dong-wook-moon simply took advantage of his colleagues. He tried to prove to Don-uk-moon that this useless friendship would backfire on him, and he would be left with nothing. He also asked him to look at his notebook for tactics if Don Wook-moon wanted to survive next time. The notebook was obviously empty. At dinner in front of other colleagues, Don-uk-moon insulted Taejun and ridiculed him, saying he was too proud of himself. Sergeant Go Yoon-kyung expressed her disagreement with him because in a team of 9 people, there was indeed no one who fought better than Kim Chol-soo. Deep down, Dong Wook-moon acknowledged this, but he did not want to praise Taejun, so he shouted that Shin Yoon-ha was the strongest. However, Sergeant Kim Seong-gyu also disagreed with this, as everyone fought according to the tactical notebook. But Taejun was different. He explained that Kim Chol-soo seemed to react automatically to everything, as if he were just a character in a game. Kim Seong-gyu remembered how, when he became a soldier, he watched Taejun and noticed that he continued to conquer dungeons. He realized that Taejun did this because he found a lot of advantages in dungeon raids. But the biggest advantage was undoubtedly the skills that could be learned and practiced by defeating bosses. In real life, this was a huge advantage, and Kim Seong-kyu wanted to defeat as many bosses as possible before others noticed them. He also dreamed of one day fighting someone as incredibly strong as Lee Soo-hyuk. After a difficult day at work, Taejun decided to log into the game before bed and check out the dungeons for the next day. After launching the game, Taejun saw a notification about a game update on the screen again. He regretted the day he first decided to update the game. Because of it, a catastrophe had occurred in the world, and he didn't want to make the same mistake again, so he refused to update. The next day, a crowd of panicked people gathered in the street. They filmed what was happening on camera and waited for help from the military. They saw a huge, unknown portal in the air that looked like an eye, and no one had any idea what it could be. Suddenly, many red dots lit up in the portal. People were very frightened, not knowing what might happen in a few seconds. Dozens of even more terrifying golems began to jump out of the portal. Some people reacted quickly and started to run away, but others were too slow and ended up in the hands of the golems. Fortunately, Shin Yoon-ha arrived to help at that very moment and began to destroy the golems one by one with her powerful fist. In an instant, other soldiers from the special forces joined her. People were glad that the soldiers arrived so quickly and could save their lives. Shin Yoon-ha ordered her colleagues to try not to miss a single monster. Sergeant Dong Wook-moon, as always, tried to shirk his duties and said that it was impossible to destroy and not miss any of them. Sergeant Go Yoon-kyung insisted that they were in the center of the city, and it was very dangerous to miss even one, as it would lead to disaster. But none of them knew what kind of monsters they were. Kim Seong-gyu claimed that there were definitely none like them in the books. Shin Yoon-ha agreed with him. She asked Taejun if he knew anything about the new monsters, but his answer was negative. Taejun tried to remember something, But among the many monsters he had fought before, he had never seen anything like these before in his life. Along with the monsters, portal stones appeared that had never been seen before. Taejun had a strange feeling that new monsters had been added, but he hadn't updated the game. After Kim Chol-soo refused to update, he continued to play the game, but nothing changed. Trying to defeat the new unknown monsters, Taejun thought about it and came to the conclusion that the updates in the world did not depend on his decisions. Shin Yunha noticed that the huge stone portals in the air looked very strange and did not glow red completely at first. Kim Chol-soo realized that if the world had really updated itself, he couldn't attack all these monsters. The game did not provide any information about these monsters, so Taejun was afraid and did not know if they should fight them at all. But despite his thoughts and doubts, he and the other soldiers continued to fight the monsters to protect themselves and the people. Suddenly, while fighting another monster, Taejun realized that its attacks were very familiar to him. Remembering that similar monsters had already appeared in the game, Taejun confidently grabbed it by the head and slammed it into the ground. He realized that despite the monsters' different appearances and movements, the nature of their attacks and the intervals between them were very similar. Shin Yun-ha and the other members of the Special Forces team quickly adapted and learned how to defeat these monsters, gaining experience in the process. Taejun watched this and was glad that so far everyone was at a level where they could fight skillfully and fight back. So at first everything was going well, but what bothered Taejun and Shin Yunha the most was the red light on the stone. It looked ominous. They came to the joint conclusion that they needed to stop before the stone turned completely red. Although Kim Chol-soo didn't know what to expect, for some reason he was sure that something would happen to the stone soon. He was also worried that the game wasn't giving them any new info, and they didn't know what else could happen. Suddenly, the stone turned completely red and began to slowly crack. The special forces were horrified by what they saw. All the little monsters they had been fighting began to simply dissolve into thin air, and a giant monster began to emerge from the stone. Since there was no information or strategy, Taejun was afraid and did not know what to do with the huge monster created from stone. It was a boss. A stone monkey holding a huge concrete pillar twice its size in its hands. All the soldiers immediately became flustered and terrified because they did not know how they could now escape from this giant. The stone monkey began to punch huge deep holes in the ground with the pole, trying to hit the soldiers who were barely managing to run away. Taejun thought about the monster's tactics as he ran and realized that every attack was dangerous because of its size, and it was also skilled at wielding the pole. The members of the special forces began to ask Shin Yun-ha to retreat in this situation, as they were all in great danger. Shin Yun-ha refused without hesitation, as it was necessary to wait until all citizens had been evacuated. She ordered the evacuation of all residents, and Sergeant Yusol contacted the support unit to establish a line of defense. Shin Yun-ha was most concerned about the residents, so she couldn't allow the monster to be released until everyone was safe. The giant stone monkey did not stop for a second and continued to destroy everything around it, trying to destroy the military as well. In a panic, Shin Yun-ha did not understand how to defeat this monster, as their tactics had only worked on smaller monsters before. She ordered all members of the squad to remain in tactical formation and try to resist the monster, while the front group helped the residents. Kim Chol-soo thought this was a good idea and remembered the huge Cyclops golem, which resembled a stone monkey. Since their attack tactics were the same, Taejun thought that if everyone worked together, they would be able to catch and defeat it. He asked Shin Yun-ho not to make any rash decisions and revealed that he had an idea. It was difficult to talk because they had to dodge attacks every minute, but Shin Yun-ha simply shouted that she trusted him. She ordered everyone to retreat, informing them that Sergeant Kim Chol-soo would continue the operation alone. Shin Yun-ha relied on Taejun because there was no other way out and asked him to take care of himself, leaving him alone with the monster. Taejun stood directly in front of the huge monster and was nervous because he did not yet fully understand the pattern of its movements. Some of its movements were definitely the same as those of the Cyclops, which made the situation a little easier. But the thing was, the Cyclops didn't have a weapon that could ram everything around it, and Taejun knew that for sure. The stone monkey's speed was also many times faster than that of the Cyclops. Despite this, Taejun understood that he had done the right thing in asking to be left alone, because the inexperienced could easily have been sent to the other world. His colleagues from the Special Forces unit just stood there waiting and were very worried about Kim Chol-soo. But Shin Yun-ha was confident in his abilities because he himself had expressed such a desire, and she assured her colleagues that he would definitely manage on his own. Kim Chol-soo skillfully dodged massive attacks and thought about how he could best attack the stone monkey. Suddenly, he began to doubt his abilities. He wasn't sure he could defeat the boss without knowing his true strength and power. Taejun felt that he had been too confident when he gave Shin Yun-ha hope, but there was no turning back, and Taejun's attention suddenly shifted to the car door he had found by chance. Shin Yun-ha watched from her hiding place, and seeing that the monster was about to pounce on Taejun, she shouted to warn him. Turning around, Kim Chol-soo saw exactly what he had been waiting for. He could have lost his life in a matter of seconds, but he didn't lose his composure. He wanted to get to the manhole cover and use it for better protection, but he realized that it would still not be enough. So he simply grabbed the car door that was already within reach and instantly activated his wind bracelet. With this magical attack, Taejun managed to immobilize the golem for a while. The members of the squad were shocked and perplexed by what they saw, and Shin Yun-ha, without explanation, broke free and ran to Taejun. Without wasting any time, he told Shin Yun-ha that he had a plan, as this golem had weaknesses similar to the previous monsters. Kim Chol-soo explained that the stone monkey also had 4 horns on its forehead, and these were probably its weak points. He said that he could knock this monster off its feet, and that they had to act differently than last time. Shin Yun-ha did not understand how he would be able to knock this giant down, but decided to simply trust his promises. She decided to try Taejun's plan and help him along with her colleagues. They planned to destroy all 4 horns of the stone monkey at once through teamwork. After discussing the course of action with the team of 5, they pounced on the golem and tried to destroy each of its horns as quickly as possible. They managed to accomplish their goal. The monster fell and began to slowly dissolve, but it glowed a very bright white color. After the victory, Taejun had a dream. In his dream, he woke up in the forest and saw a girl dressed as a mage. She asked him how he was feeling, but he did not understand who she was or why she was dressed that way. Taejun replied that everything was fine and he could walk, but he realized that he was not speaking with his own voice. The stranger in the dream offered to take Taejun to a spring to cool off and come to his senses. He couldn't understand whether he was in a dream or not and why his body was moving between worlds instantly. Kim Chol-soo followed the stranger, and suddenly they stumbled upon a huge golem, unknown to him, who was about to attack. The girl, frightened, called Taejun to her, shouting the name Jin-ho, and handed him a spear. At that moment, the dream ended. When Kim Chol-soo woke up, he saw Shin Yun-ho in front of him and did not understand what had happened. She explained to him that when the monster disappeared, a bright light appeared and all the members of the attacking group fainted. Taejun was still in shock from the dream because he had never seen anything like it before and wondered if everyone had lost consciousness or only those who had attacked the monster. He even thought that this dream was reality because everything in it seemed too realistic. At the same time, the dream was like something out of a fantasy, but the golem looked as real as possible, and the girl even said the name Jin-ho. Everyone who had lost consciousness after the battle was taken to Shinarim's hospital. She suggested that they might have been infected with some kind of virus, but the test results were normal and there were no visible injuries on the 5 people. At the same time, they all claimed that they felt fine and nothing was bothering them. Sergeant Kang Woo-ho said that while she was unconscious, she had a strange but very vivid dream. Sergeant Paik Min-woo asked if she had dreamed about a girl in a magical costume, and it turned out that their dreams were identical. Kim Seong-gyu continued that after that a giant monster appeared in his dream. Taejun was shocked by everything he heard and couldn't believe that such a thing was even possible. But most of all, he couldn't understand what it all meant if his colleagues had also dreamed about Jin-ho, whom they didn't even know. Shin Arim also wondered why the brains of 5 people reacted in this way. She explained that there was still too little information to determine the exact cause of what had happened. Shin Yun-ha called Kim Chol-soo over and asked him to give her a minute. On his way home, Baek Min-woo asked his other colleagues what they thought of Kim Chol-soo. He was frightened and puzzled by the fact that Kim Chol-soo was able to block the attack of the giant golem with a regular car door. Kim Seong-gyu replied that it didn't matter anymore, but the door should have at least broken. Kang Woo-ho suggested that it could have just been Kim Chol-soo's good luck, but Baek Min-woo also pointed out that Kim Chol-soo's personal information was classified and that he was hiding his face. Kang Woo-ho replied that they didn't need his face to carry out their tasks, but he still couldn't understand why Taejun was so bothered by it. After listening to all these arguments, Kim Sung-kyu even joked that Kim Chol-soo could be a combat robot created by the government. Taejun caught up with Shin Yun-ho to talk to her about what she had asked him to discuss. She took a can of soda out of the vending machine and sighed, telling Taejun that one moment from her dream was bothering her a lot, namely the moment when the girl looked to the side and screamed, "Yu Jin-ho!" Shin Yun-ha had heard that name before and remembered that it was the name of one of Taejun's acquaintances. She had thought about it a lot, but despite this, she couldn't figure out if Kim Chol-soo really knew this person. From the look on her face, Taejun guessed that she wanted to conduct her own investigation, but Shin Yun-ha simply couldn't ignore it. After thinking for a moment, Taejun revealed that Jin-ho was his classmate in middle school. He said that they became friends simply because they sat at the same desk. Taejun also decided to tell her that he had been interested in programming since those days and had started to study it. Shin Yun-ha was very surprised to learn that he had become a programmer. Taejun went on to say that he had released 3 games, one of which had become popular. For some reason, Shin Yun-ha didn't pay much attention to his story, and Taejun had an idea. He thought he had a chance to get out of this mess and solve the problem because no one else knew the whole truth yet, including her. Shin Yun-ha then asked where Jin-ho was and if it was possible to contact him, to which Taejun immediately replied in the negative. She was upset and asked why he couldn't contact Jin-ho himself since they were friends. Kim Chol-soo explained that after Namsan disappeared, contact with Jin-ho was also lost. It was even possible that he was no longer alive. Soo-kaik was looking through the latest news about new monsters that had broken out of the stone. He remembered seeing such monsters somewhere before and opened a photo of an identical monster on his phone. Soo-hook had previously found this photo in a work file on Sun Haya's computer. He tried to put the pieces together in his head and wondered who would be the next to disappear if the game really came to life. In the administration building, the commander called Paik Min-woo into his office. and asked him about the rumors that the miners from the Union had discovered something. He said they had found a white rock and suggested forming an investigation team of subcontractors to contact the miners. But the commander did not approve of the idea of using subcontractors because they would act on their own anyway. He explained that it would be better to avoid negative consequences and be cautious if the Union wanted to gain public support. After a hard day, Taejun finally returned home, very tired but relieved. Yeonhee greeted him suspiciously and, asking him not to move, began to examine him. Taejun didn't like such checks, but he didn't have the strength to object. Yeonhee explained that she was checking him because he had fought a terrifying monster. Yeonhee told him how scared she was when she saw the news about it. Taejun reassured her that he had just returned home from the military hospital and that the examination showed that everything was fine. He looked at Yeonhee with tired eyes, which she found very suspicious. He was concerned and asked if everything was okay, to which Yeonhee replied that nothing could happen to her and that she was more worried about Taejun. He also asked if Yeonhee had gotten used to her new home. She replied that it was cozy but too big and spacious. She explained that when she was alone, the house sometimes became eerily quiet. It was a house that Shin Yunha had helped Taejun find after the incident with Chi Yun-soo. Important military officials lived in this house, so security was high. Taejun was most grateful to Shin Yunha for this. Suddenly, his phone rang. It was Mr. Lee from his previous job, and Taejun was puzzled as to why he was calling. In the laboratory, Shin Arim continued to investigate the white stone fragment. Shin Yunha asked if she had found out anything yet, and Shin Arim explained that if you looked only at the stone, it was no different from the golem fragments. She also said that before it was destroyed, the white stone had certain characteristics, but after that it became completely ordinary. Although it sounded strange, Shinarim suggested that perhaps they were trying to explain something unnatural through science. She shared her thoughts that in manga and games, there were various monsters and items with their own characteristics. When they were destroyed, their properties also disappeared. She leaned toward the idea that what was happening was similar to a materialized work of fiction, and all the effects could work as intended in this fictional universe. Shin Yunha still did not understand the connection to reality. For clarity, Shinarim gave an example of transplanting fragments into rats and humans. The golem's form always manifested in only one place on the body. She concluded that no other parts of the body could be changed, because it was probably programmed in advance. This sounded both absurd to Shin Yunha and very convincing. Shin Arim said that this could be, for example, from a manga, animation, or game. After Mr. Lee's call, she and Taejun met at a cafe, and Mr. Lee said that he ran a small mining guild. He also said that competition was tough, but recently they had come across an excellent opportunity. Taejun was surprised and asked what kind of opportunity it was. Mr. Lee told him about a miners' union that had commissioned a project from them and that his guild needed Taejun's help. Taejun was sure that Mr. Lee didn't know about his abilities or his service in the special forces. He hoped that Mr. Lee was treating him like a friend. He even considered refusing, but something bothered him, so Taejun asked for more details about the project. To confirm his thoughts, Taejun said that such a request was unexpected for him, since he himself had no experience in mining. Asking everyone to keep it confidential, Mr. Lee reported on a flying white stone from which monsters were jumping out, and that the Union had found a similar stone. He explained that the guild's task was to investigate and destroy this stone by any means necessary, but the main goal was to do it before the monsters appeared, and then it might not even be necessary to fight. Taejun's task would be only to provide support from behind if it suddenly came to a battle. The story of the sudden appearance of the new stone greatly alarmed Taejun. It was likely that similar trials awaited them ahead. It was no longer possible to learn anything from the game, but Taejun believed that they would be able to cope with the help of items from the dungeon. But what he feared most was that with each victory, information about Jinho would spread even further. To stay on top of everything, Taejun decided to agree and asked Mr. Lee to trust him.